It was the spring of 1990. A Texas state trooper pulled up behind an 18-wheeler parked awkwardly along the shoulder of Interstate 10. To him, it looked like a routine check. A tired trucker, maybe broken down, maybe resting where he shouldn't. But as the officer walked up to the cab, something didn't feel right. The engine was off. The curtains in the sleeper were drawn tight. And when the trooper knocked on the metal door, the man who opened it, tall, pale, with glasses and a carefully groomed mustache, smiled in a way that made the officer's skin crawl. His name was Robert Ben Rhoades, but the trooper didn't know that yet. What he did know was this: somewhere behind that man, inside the truck's cab, he heard a muffled noise. A whimper, a human sound. He brushed past Rhoades, forced the door wide, and there, in the back, was an 18-year-old girl, shackled, terrified, chained by the neck. In that single instant, the mask slipped. The polite, soft-spoken trucker became something else entirely. The officer realized he hadn't stumbled on a simple traffic stop. He had opened the door to a nightmare that had been rolling down America's highways for years. Robert Ben Rhoades would later be called the truck stop killer. And the full story of what he did, how he used America's endless interstates as his hunting grounds, how he trapped victims inside a mobile torture chamber hidden in plain sight, is almost too disturbing to believe. But to understand how this monster came to be, we need to go back to the beginning. Rhoades was born in Council Bluffs, Iowa in 1945. His childhood wasn't filled with any one traumatic event that could explain what he became. Instead, it was marked by quiet dysfunction. His father was strict, emotionally cold, later took his own life while facing criminal charges. That left a permanent scar, a fracture in Robert's sense of control, a wound he would carry into adulthood. As a teenager, Rhoades struggled to fit in. Teachers remembered him as bright, but antisocial. He joined the Marines only to be dishonorably discharged for misconduct. He bounced from job to job, retail, insurance, odd work, never able to settle, never able to connect. But what Robert lacked is stability he made up for in manipulation. He learned to wear a mask, polite, intelligent, approachable. People who met him described him as normal, friendly even. No one suspected what lived beneath the surface. By the late 1970s, Rhoades found trucking. For him, the highways were freedom. They gave him isolation, anonymity, and something else, opportunity. Behind the wheel of a semi, he had an endless supply of potential victims: hitchhikers, runaways, sex workers, anyone desperate enough to step off the pavement and into the cab of a stranger's truck. And Robert Rhoades' truck was no ordinary vehicle.
Inside the sleeper cab, he built a chamber. He installed handcuffs, chains, gags. He turned the back of his semi into a rolling prison cell. Once a victim stepped inside, the doors locked, the engine roared to life, and the interstate swallowed them whole. The first confirmed murders linked to Rhoades came in the mid-1980s, but investigators believe he had been active much earlier. The pattern was brutal and methodical. He would lure women, often young, vulnerable, promising rides, safety, maybe even a job. Once inside, he overpowered them. Hours turned into days. Victims were tortured, humiliated, kept alive just long enough for Rhoades to exert complete control. Then, just as suddenly, he would kill them and dump their bodies along lonely stretches of highway. Remote ditches, desert roads, places where no one would find them for weeks, if ever. By 1990, Robert Ben Rhoades was a predator perfected. He had driven hundreds of thousands of miles, always alone, always hunting. Truck stops, interstate shoulders, forgotten towns, they weren't rest points for him. They were hunting grounds. And if not for the chance encounter on that Texas roadside, he might never have been caught. That night in 1990, the girl found in his truck was Regina Walters, only 15 years old. She had vanished months earlier with her boyfriend Ricky Jones. Ricky would never be seen alive again, and Regina was about to become the key to uncovering the true scope of Rhoades' crimes. Because when police searched his truck and later his home, they uncovered photographs, chilling, posed photographs of Regina, dressed in black, terrified, forced into positions against the wall of an abandoned barn. These weren't random snapshots, they were trophies. Proof of the control he held in those final moments. Proof that Robert Ben Rhoades didn't just kill. He staged, he documented, he celebrated. And it was only the beginning of what investigators would discover. When investigators first looked at the photographs of Regina Walters, they froze. The black dress, the high heels, the old rotting barn, the terror in her eyes. Every image seemed staged, deliberate, like Rhoades was directing a nightmare photo shoot. She wasn't just a victim, she was a character in his twisted fantasy. For police, the photographs were the most chilling evidence they had ever seen. They weren't just crime scene pictures. They were a window into Rhoades' mind, a man who didn't just kill, but controlled every aspect of suffering down to the last frame. Regina had disappeared in early 1990. She and her boyfriend, Ricky Jones, had told friends they were hitchhiking to Mexico. They never made it. What actually happened was this. Rhoades picked them up along the interstate. At first, it must have felt like a stroke of luck, a ride, food, safety. But once inside his truck, the nightmare began. Rhoades killed Ricky almost immediately. He saw him as a problem, an obstacle to the control he craved. With Ricky gone, Regina was completely at his mercy. For weeks, maybe even longer, he kept her captive inside his mobile torture chamber. He cut her hair. He forced her to wear clothes he chose. He chained her in place when he drove, and when he stopped, he photographed her, documenting her fear as if it were art. Eventually, he took her to that barn in rural Illinois. There, he posed her once last time. Then he strangled her with a garrote, a wire twisted tight until her life slipped away. She was just 15. Photographs of Regina Walters became infamous, not because they solved a crime, but because they revealed the ritual behind Rhoades' violence. This wasn't random. This wasn't impulsive. It was planned, orchestrated, controlled. And it was not his first time. As investigators dug deeper into Rhoades' past, they uncovered a trail that stretched back years. 2 years earlier, in 1988, the bodies of Patricia Walsh and Douglas Zayak were found dumped along highways in Texas and Utah. Patricia had been a newlywed. Douglas, her husband, had vanished alongside her. Rhoades had picked them up while they were hitchhiking, just like Regina and Ricky. Douglas was murdered quickly, shot and discarded like Ricky had been. Patricia, however, was kept alive, For days, maybe even longer, she endured the same torment Regina would later face. When Rhoades was finished, he killed her and abandoned her body in the desert. The parallels were unmistakable. The pattern was clear. And investigators began to realize Robert Ben Rhoades had been killing for a long, long time. But just how long? Some FBI profilers believe Rhoades may have started as early as the 1970s. At the height of the interstate trucking boom, thousands of young people, runaways, drifters, hitchhikers, vanished without a trace. Many of those cases were never solved. And now, with Rhoades in custody, investigators began to wonder how many of those faceless missing persons had crossed paths with the truck stop killer. Some estimates put his victim count in the dozens. Others say it could be over 50. The truth may never be known. The most disturbing detail came when investigators searched his home. Alongside his truck, they found an entire collection of bondage equipment, chains, torture devices, even more photographs. Every discovery painted the same picture. Robert Ben Rhoades lived a double life. By day, he was a long-haul trucker, quiet, dependable, a man who blended into the endless stream of rigs crossing the country. But at night, and in the hidden world of his sleeper cab, he was a predator. His truck wasn't just transportation. It was a prison on wheels, a prison that left no escape once you stepped inside.
Still, law enforcement had a problem. Even with Regina's photographs, even with the growing list of victims, the timeline was scattered. Rhoades never stayed in one place. His crimes crossed state lines, jurisdiction after jurisdiction. Each murder was separated by hundreds of miles. To build a case, investigators had to weave it all together to show that this wasn't coincidence, but the work of one man, crisscrossing America, killing at will. And in the middle of that puzzle was Rhoades himself, sitting in a Texas jail, calm, composed, reading books as though nothing at all had happened. While Robert Ben Rhoades sat in custody, investigators across multiple states began piecing together the puzzle. It wasn't easy. His crimes stretched across thousands of miles: Texas, Illinois, Utah, Arizona, Nevada. Each murder was separated by distance and jurisdiction, leaving fragments of evidence scattered across the country. But slowly, the pieces began to align. Detectives returned to the photographs of Regina Walters. They weren't just proof of her captivity. They were a timeline, a record, a twisted diary that Rhoades had created himself. Every detail, the barn, the clothing, her haircut, could be traced. And when paired with his routes as a long-haul trucker, investigators could map exactly where Rhoades had been and when. The pattern became undeniable. Next came the bodies. In 1989, a woman named Candace Walsh had been found murdered in Utah. Her husband, Douglas Zayak, was found separately in Texas. At the time, the two cases had seemed unrelated. Now they fit perfectly into Rhoades' signature. Detectives learned Rhoades had confessed, not openly, but in offhand comments. To one inmate, he admitted that he killed Douglas quickly, but kept Patricia alive for a long ride. It was the same story over and over. A couple on the road, the man eliminated immediately, the woman kept as a prisoner until her death. The further investigators dug, the darker it became. Evidence surfaced suggesting that Rhoades had been active long before the 1980s. There were missing hitchhikers, runaways, and unidentified remains scattered along truck stops and interstates dating back to the late 1970s.
The FBI believed he could be responsible for dozens of deaths, possibly over 50. And when agents searched his home, they found more than just equipment. They found trophies, photographs, personal items, even journals, a hidden archive of his victims, each one cataloged like a collection. It became clear that Robert Ben Rhoades wasn't just a killer, he was a predator who saw America's highways as his personal hunting ground. But while investigators were building their case, Rhoades himself was disturbingly calm. Behind bars, he didn't lash out, he didn't panic. Instead, he read books, wrote letters, and acted as though none of it touched him. To guards, he seemed intelligent, almost polite. He wasn't a monster in appearance, he was just ordinary. That was the most unsettling part, because beneath that calm exterior was a man who had spent decades torturing and killing without hesitation. Finally, in 1994, prosecutors had enough to take him to trial. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the photographs, the witness statements, and the confirmed murders, Rhoades made a choice. He pled guilty. No dramatic testimony, no long trial, just a quiet admission of guilt. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But even that wasn't the end. Years later, in 2012, Rhoades faced additional charges in Illinois for the murder of Regina Walters. Once again, he pled guilty. Once again, he was handed another life sentence. By then, investigators knew the truth. Robert Ben Rhoades would never leave prison alive. And yet, the story lingers. Because for every victim we know by name, Regina Walters, Ricky Jones, Patricia Walsh, Douglas Zayak, there are countless others who remain unknown. Women who disappeared along the highway, couples who vanished without a trace, cases that were never solved. The FBI believes Robert Ben Rhoades may have killed for 2 decades before he was caught. How many lives were taken inside that rolling prison on wheels? No one knows. And Robert Ben Rhoades, the truck stop killer, has never said.
If you enjoyed today's video, we thank you very much. Please like and subscribe to Rare Breed Chronicles. And let's dive into another story that defies the ordinary.
The streets of the Vancouver downtown east side were a maze of flickering neon, crumbling sidewalks, and desperation etched into every face. This was a world most people walked past without notice, a place where addiction, poverty, and crime intertwined so tightly that the tragedies of the residents became invisible. And it was here that Robert William Pickton, outwardly unremarkable, would begin a reign of terror that would shock a nation. Robert was born in 1949, one of 6 children, raised on a struggling family farm in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. The Pickton family was well known locally, but not for warmth or compassion. There were rumors, whispered behind closed doors, of abuse, neglect, and dysfunction. A childhood shadowed by violence and secrets. It was the perfect soil for the seeds of a mind that could compartmentalize horror and maintain a facade of normalcy. To his neighbors, Robert was quiet, awkward, a man who kept to himself. He worked with his family, tended the pigs, repaired the barns, and made himself useful around the farm. There was nothing overtly threatening in his demeanor, but beneath the surface, a meticulous, patient, and calculating mind was growing. A mind capable of exploiting society's blind spots and preying on the most vulnerable. The downtown east side offered him opportunity. Sex workers and drug users vanished routinely, their absences dismissed, uninvestigated. Friends worried,
Shelters wondered, but the authorities rarely connected the dots, and the city's elite never looked too closely. It was here that Pickton honed his predation, learning how to blend into the fabric of a community while simultaneously becoming its predator. He lured women to his farm with promises: cash for sex, temporary work, companionship, simple things that seemed ordinary in a world where survival was already perilous. Once inside, the facade dissolved. The farm was no longer a pastoral landscape, but a stage for unspeakable acts, a carefully hidden theater of cruelty. Pigs, pens, barns, and empty fields became tools for both concealment and horror, while Robert's outwardly calm demeanor allowed him to operate in plain sight. Neighbors occasionally noticed anomalies: a woman seen entering his property and never leaving, strange noises, muffled cries, thuds, sudden silences. Yet no one dared question him too closely. He had built his reputation carefully: polite, helpful, unassuming, a quiet man with a family business. The perfect cover for someone whose crimes would remain hidden for years. By the time authorities began piecing together the pattern of disappearances, decades of victims had passed through his farm. Each life erased, each disappearance leaving a faint trace in police records, in whispers along the streets, in the hearts of families desperate for answers. And so the first act closes not with discovery, but with suspense. A quiet farm in Port Coquitlam, a man who looks ordinary, and a darkness growing stronger, hidden behind fences, barns, and the stench of pigs.
Port Coquitlam was quiet, almost idyllic. From the street, Robert Pickton's farm looked like any other rural property: pigs grunting in pens, rusted barns creaking in the wind, the smell of manure heavy in the summer air. But beneath this veneer of ordinary farm life, a sinister pattern was taking shape. The farm itself was deceptively functional. One barn housed the pigs. Another, meticulously cleaned, became a storage area for the objects of his darker pursuits. He maintained the property with care, repairing fences, clearing brush, and ensuring that visitors saw only what he wanted them to see. He was methodical, calculating, and patient. Every detail of the farm worked in service of secrecy. His victims were drawn to him slowly, often unknowingly. Women from Vancouver's downtown east side, marginalized, struggling, and overlooked, would be offered small jobs, money, or rides to safety. Pickton knew their routines, their vulnerabilities. To them, he seemed like a friendly, harmless man, the local farmer, the neighbor, the helper. No one suspected that the pig pens, the empty barns, and the hidden rooms would become instruments of unspeakable horror. Once on the farm, the illusion disappeared. Witnesses and later confessions revealed a grim pattern: isolation, manipulation, and then violence. Some victims were strangled. Others were stabbed. Some, horrifyingly, were subjected to methods designed to ensure they would not survive and would leave no trace. The farm's animals became grim accomplices: pigs that consumed human remains, making recovery and investigation nearly impossible. Pickton's methods were grotesquely systematic. He kept detailed records, maps, and notes, not for notoriety, but to ensure that the crimes could continue without detection. The brutality was hidden beneath routine farm work. Blood-stained tools were cleaned or discarded, tracks concealed in mud,
evidence masked by the chaotic life of the animals and the land. Even as rumors circulated, women disappearing, strange noises coming from the property, and odd deliveries of materials, authorities were slow to act. The victims' social status, their marginalization, meant that disappearances were often dismissed or deprioritized. Pickton exploited this societal blind spot with cold precision, understanding that no one would look too closely at a man who seemed harmless, at a farm where noise and dirt were expected. Neighbors occasionally noted odd behaviors. Some described women entering the property at night, never to return. Others reported strange smells, screams muffled by the wind, or suspicious deliveries of large sacks. Yet the pattern was dismissed. A city desensitized, a law enforcement system under-resourced, and a predator who understood both. The farm became a quiet empire of horror. Year after year, Pickton expanded his network of lures and traps. The pigs, ever present, became both cover and instrument, consuming what could not be disposed of in any other way. Tools, clothing, and personal effects disappeared, leaving no trace for families searching for missing loved ones. By the late 1980s, a grim legend had begun to form among those who knew the downtown East Side. Women whispered of the farm. They told each other to be careful, to avoid the quiet man who offered rides or work. But the warnings were vague, because no one had seen the full extent of the horror, and few had ever confronted it directly. Pickton's patience and cunning ensured that his crimes could continue for decades. Each act of violence was carefully calculated, every detail hidden behind the mask of normalcy. And while the city carried on oblivious, the farm became a silent graveyard, a place where society's blind spots allowed evil to flourish.
The Port Coquitlam farm was a place that looked ordinary by day, but once inside its barns and back rooms, the ordinary veil vanished. The smell of manure was constant, but beneath it there was a more sinister odor: blood, decay, and the faint, coppery tang of death. This was not a place of animals alone. It had become a theater for a man whose mind treated murder as routine, almost banal. The barns were deceptively large. One contained the pigs, moving through mud and waste, entirely unaware of the horrors surrounding them. Another, quieter, hidden from sight, became the space where Pickton lured his victims. Women arrived, thinking they would find work, safety, or money. Once inside, the calm, polite exterior he presented dissolved. The violence was swift, controlled, deliberate. Pickton's methods were both improvisational and systematic. Some women were strangled, others stabbed. But more disturbing were the details of how he concealed evidence. Pigs, omnipresent and voracious, were used to consume flesh, erasing traces. Blood was washed away, clothes burned or hidden. He created a system where the crimes could continue without leaving recoverable evidence, relying on the chaos of a working farm to mask the atrocities. Inside the barns, the psychological horror was palpable. The cries of victims were muffled by walls, doors, and animals, yet sometimes they pierced the stillness, audible to those unlucky enough to glimpse the property. Tools, knives, ropes, and makeshift restraints were meticulously organized, ready for use. Every act was calculated, every movement planned. Pickton's demeanor, calm, almost casual, made him all the more terrifying.
Neighbors sometimes noted odd deliveries of large sacks or boxes. Pickton insisted they contained animal feed or farm supplies. Few questioned him. No one imagined the grotesque reality. And while rumors circulated, missing women, strange noises, odd smells, authorities had little evidence to act upon. The victims' social status, primarily sex workers marginalized by society, meant their disappearances were often ignored or treated as inconsequential. Years passed. The farm grew. Pickton refined his methods, each crime blending into routine, each disappearance leaving behind a faint trail of suspicion, but no proof. His victims became statistics, files in police drawers, brief mentions in newspapers, or whispers among those who frequented the downtown East Side. But to Pickton, they were merely part of a system, fuel for a pattern of horror he controlled entirely. There were occasional glimpses of his dual life. On the streets of Vancouver, he was quiet, polite, a man who helped with local chores and sometimes donated small amounts of money. To anyone meeting him briefly, he seemed harmless, even helpful. But back at the farm, he was a predator, a meticulous orchestrator of pain and death. The contrast was chilling. A man who could cross between two worlds, leaving the gruesome world hidden from society, invisible to those who might have stopped him. Even his family seemed unaware. While Pickton lived and worked among them, the full extent of his crimes remained hidden. To neighbors, he was eccentric but unthreatening. To the world outside, he was invisible. To those trapped inside his farm, he was a nightmare. By the late 1990s, the scope of his crimes had grown so extensive that the farm had become a labyrinth of horror. Pigs roaming among barns and pens, human remains carefully concealed, victims' belongings scattered or destroyed. The property itself seemed to swallow the evidence, the chaos of animals and machinery masking the darkest truths of a man who had perfected the art of disappearing without a trace. The tension in the city was building. The missing women, the rumors, the occasional sightings of strange sacks or deliveries, all were pieces of a puzzle that had yet to be solved. The world outside the farm continued, oblivious, while the horrors inside escalated, each act more chilling than the last. By the late 1990s, the whispers could no longer be ignored. Families of missing women pressed authorities. The downtown East Side community became increasingly vocal, and police slowly began to connect the threads. But even as the investigation began, the true scale of Pickton's crimes remained almost unimaginable. The first break came in 1997, when a woman narrowly escaped his farm. She had been lured under the pretense of money and work, but she managed to flee, providing the first hands-on account of the horrors inside. Her description of the barns, the pens, the dark spaces where women had been held began to build a chilling picture, but it would take years for law enforcement to move decisively. The RCMP, local police, and eventually the combined efforts of multiple agencies began to investigate Pickton. Officers scoured the downtown East Side for missing women, cross-referencing reports spanning decades. They interviewed families, friends, and associates, slowly piecing together a pattern. All the women disappeared after interacting with the same man. When authorities finally focused on the farm, they were unprepared for what they would find. The property appeared ordinary from the outside, but as investigators entered the barns, the stench of decay hit them immediately. Piles of animal feed, bags of fertilizer, and ordinary farming equipment masked a grotesque reality. Evidence of human remains, carefully concealed, but unmistakably present. Inside the barns, officers discovered pockets of horror. Bone fragments, personal items, and remnants of victims' clothing were hidden among pig pens and storage areas. The investigators were forced to confront a systemized killer whose crimes had been concealed for decades through meticulous planning and the chaotic environment of a working farm.
Pickton's own admissions, once interrogated, were chilling. He spoke casually of acts that would stagger any investigator. Victims lured, murdered, and disposed of with efficiency. Some of the details were almost inconceivable. The use of pigs to eliminate evidence, the careful concealment of remains, and the decades-long illusion of justice. As the news broke, the public reaction was of horror and outrage. Vancouver, a city proud of its culture and community, was forced to confront the unimaginable. The downtown East Side community, long marginalized, became a focal point for both grief and anger, demanding accountability for a tragedy that had been ignored for too long. The scale of the crimes made headlines worldwide. Police estimated that Pickton had killed at least 49 women, though many suspected the true number was higher. The farm, once a quiet corner of Port Coquitlam, became infamous, a symbol of neglect, oversight, and the dark capacity for human evil. The investigation also revealed institutional failings. Social services, police departments, and the broader community had repeatedly overlooked warnings. Missing person reports were deprioritized. Calls for help were ignored. Each failure allowed Pickton to continue his crimes longer than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation culminated, Pickton was arrested in 2002. He was charged with multiple counts of murder, and the details of his crimes began to be revealed in court. Families, investigators, and the public were forced to confront decades of horror, meticulously orchestrated and hidden in plain sight. Even after his arrest, the story continued to unfold. The farm was searched extensively, and more remains were discovered, confirming the horrifying scale of his crimes. Witnesses testified to the abuses and disappearances, revealing the human cost of Pickton's decades-long campaign of terror.
The courtroom in Vancouver was tense, heavy with anticipation and grief. Families of missing women filled the seats, some stoic, others barely holding back tears, each carrying decades of unanswered questions. Across from them sat Robert Pickton, quiet and seemingly detached, his calm demeanor only amplifying the horror of the crimes he had committed. The trial began in earnest in 2007, focusing on the 26 murders for which prosecutors felt they had the strongest evidence. But as testimony unfolded, it became clear that Pickton's crimes were far more extensive, stretching into the decades-long disappearances of vulnerable women across Vancouver. Families recounted loved ones last seen alive, voices trembling as they described encounters with the man who had preyed upon them with meticulous calculation. Investigators took the stand, painting a picture of unimaginable horror. The Port Coquitlam farm, once a seemingly mundane property, was described in painstaking detail. The barns, pens, and hidden areas where Pickton had lured, restrained, and murdered victims. The use of pigs to dispose of human remains. The ingenious concealment of evidence in feed bins and storage areas. Each revelation stunned the courtroom. Each detail elicited gasps, tears, and murmurs of disbelief. Survivors testified as well. Women who had narrowly escaped shared harrowing stories of deception, manipulation, and sheer terror. They described how Pickton had isolated them, how he had calculated their every move, and how close they had come to becoming another unrecorded statistic. Their courage brought the chilling reality of the crimes into stark focus, proving that the horror was not myth, it was tangible, methodical, and deliberate. Pickton himself rarely showed emotion. His calm, sometimes disarming presence contrasted with the chaos of testimony and evidence, leaving an eerie impression on all who witnessed him. This contrast, ordinary man and monstrous killer, only intensified the public fascination and revulsion. The verdict, when it came, was met with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Pickton was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder, though the number of potential victims was believed to be far higher.
He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for 25 years, a measure some felt inadequate given the scale of his crimes. The families, the city, and the world were left to grapple with the reality that justice, while delivered in part, could not undo decades of pain, fear, and loss. The legacy of Robert Pickton extends beyond the courtroom. His crimes exposed societal blind spots, the vulnerability of marginalized women, the oversight of law enforcement, and the indifference of a community that too often ignored the missing. Downtown East Side activists and advocates used the tragedy to push for reform, demanding better protection, attention, and accountability for those most at risk. The Port Coquitlam farm, once a place of horror hidden behind fences and animals, has become an enduring symbol of human cruelty. Its story is told in documentaries, books, and news articles, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide in plain sight. Even decades later, Vancouver and Canada continue to reckon with the implications of Pickton's crimes. The victims' names, once neglected and forgotten, are now remembered. Their stories serve as both a warning and a testament to resilience. Communities honor their memory, ensuring that while Pickton may have escaped detection for years, the women he victimized will never be forgotten. Robert Pickton remains in prison, a man whose quiet exterior masked a methodical, monstrous cruelty. His name evokes horror, fascination, and disbelief, but the story is ultimately about more than him. It is about the victims, the families, the investigators, and a society forced to confront uncomfortable truths about vulnerability, oversight, and the human capacity for evil. The darkness of Port Coquitlam's farm has passed into history, yet its shadow lingers. It serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that monsters may walk among us, and that vigilance, empathy, and justice are never optional. And so the story closes, not with peace, but with reflection, horror, and remembrance. The farm is gone, Pickton is imprisoned, but the memory of his crimes endures, carved into the history of Vancouver and into the collective consciousness of all who hear the tale.
If you enjoyed today's video, we thank you very much. Please like and subscribe to Rare Breed Chronicles. And let's dive into another story that defies the ordinary.
The Alaska wilderness stretches endlessly, a frozen labyrinth of snow, pine, and shadows. Silence dominates, broken only by the crunch of snow under boots, the distant groan of ice along a riverbank, or the whispering wind threading through the trees. This vast, isolated expanse is unforgiving, and yet it is here that Robert Hansen prowled, a predator cloaked in ordinariness. To the outside world, he was a polite, quiet baker, friendly to neighbors and consistent in routine. But in the woods, in the frozen labyrinth beyond the safety of town, he transformed into a hunter of humans. Hansen's first victim of this sequence is young, vulnerable, and unsuspecting. She leaves Anchorage, responding to the lure of money, companionship, or a small promise of escape from her daily struggles. She steps into Hansen's car, the door closing with an ordinary click, masking the extraordinary terror about to unfold. The drive is unremarkable, calm, and almost soothing, but every mile carries her further into isolation, further from help, and deeper into Hansen's meticulously constructed domain of fear. The moment they leave the road and enter the dense forest, the environment shifts. The crunch of snow underfoot becomes an oppressive reminder of distance from civilization. Trees loom like silent sentinels. Rivers, half frozen, glint in the weak sunlight. Obstacles that she will have to navigate if she wants to survive.
The cold bites at her face and fingers, frost forming along eyelashes, snow seeping into clothing, each step draining energy and will. Hansen watches from a distance, patient, silent, calculating each movement. Once released, the hunt begins. The victim must navigate terrain designed to confuse, disorient, and exhaust. Every sound, the snap of a branch, the whistle of wind, raises the possibility of Hansen's approach. Every shadow becomes a threat, every tree a potential hiding place for the predator. The fear is constant, omnipresent, a slow-burning terror amplified by isolation. She stumbles through drifts of snow, lungs burning, muscles screaming, panic alternating with brief flashes of hope that she might evade him. But Hansen's tracking is precise. Years of experience with firearms and hunting animals translate seamlessly to stalking humans. The forest itself is a participant in the hunt, amplifying helplessness, obscuring vision, and constraining choices. Hours stretch into an eternity. Hunger gnaws, frost numbs, and exhaustion weighs down each step. Hansen closes the distance with quiet, deliberate patience, forcing compliance not through immediate violence, but through psychological terror. He fires his rifle nearby, the crack of the shot echoing through the trees, a reminder of his presence and power. Every instinct screams to run, yet the forest is a trap, a maze of snow, ice, and tree trunks. Her heartbeat pounds in her ears, each breath becomes visible in the frigid air, a marker of her vulnerability.
When capture seems inevitable, Hansen alternates threat with manipulation. Calm, measured tones encourage compliance, promising survival or temporary reprieve only to escalate fear again moments later. Mirrors of control are constructed in his mind. Paths blocked, snow concealing his approach, prey too exhausted to predict escape. Each release and recapture is a game of dominance, an exercise in exercising control over human movement, fear, and willpower. The forest stretches endlessly, a maze of white and green, where snow drapes heavily over branches and the ground shifts with hidden ice and treacherous roots. Every step is a struggle. Boots sink into deep drifts, feet numb with cold, each movement an exercise in endurance. For Hansen's victims, the forest is both prison and trap. There is no safety, no landmarks, only the relentless presence of isolation and the awareness that their predator watches, waits, and plans each step of the hunt. Hansen's methods are chillingly methodical. He releases victims into the wilderness with minimal guidance, letting exhaustion, disorientation, and the cold sap strength and hope. He observes from a distance, hiding behind trees or terrain, his eyes sharp, calculating, patient. The wind carries his prey's scent. Their tracks are obvious in the fresh snow, and his firearms lie ready, a tool to maintain psychological dominance. Every step the victim takes is anticipated. Every panic-driven choice is absorbed into Hansen's strategy. Some victims attempt to flee toward rivers or steep inclines, thinking these barriers might prevent pursuit. The terrain, however, works against them. Icy waters slow their pace, rocks hidden beneath snow twist ankles, branches whip across faces and hands, and the very scale of the forest disorients.
Hansen uses this environment as an extension of his control. The wilderness amplifies terror, isolating the victim from any hope of rescue. Snow muffles footsteps and hides escape routes, but it also leaves tracks, a breadcrumb trail Hansen reads with deadly precision. One young woman collapses in exhaustion, lungs burning, skin numb, and vision blurred from cold. Every instinct screams to run, yet the energy to move fails her. Hansen approaches silently, noting her panic and fatigue. He fires near her, not to hit, but to terrify. A crack of sound echoing through trees, reminding her of powerlessness. The forest itself feels alive, a participant in the hunt. Every gust of wind, every swaying tree branch enhancing fear. Hansen's manipulation is both physical and psychological. He alternates patience and threat, observation and interaction, creating a rhythm designed to break resistance. Victims report a terrifying clarity during these hunts. The forest becomes a sensory trap, with sounds amplified, distances distorted, and every shadow carrying potential danger. Psychological terror is constant. There is no respite, only the pressure of relentless pursuit. Hours bleed into days. Victims face hunger, frostbite, and deep fatigue. Limbs shake uncontrollably, teeth chatter, lungs burn with each desperate breath. Hansen's control is not only over their bodies, but over the perception of time itself. He structures fear, ensuring that every moment stretches, every choice feels weighted with consequences, and every movement is constrained by his calculated presence. Amid this, survival becomes a game of wits. Some victims hide in snow-covered underbrush, pressing bodies into cold earth to avoid detection. Some attempt shallow rivers, hoping for concealment in icy currents. Every decision is fraught with danger. Wrong turns, false assumptions, or even brief missteps may bring them into direct confrontation with Hansen. Yet even amid terror, moments of strategy and courage emerge. Small acts of resistance that, though exhausting, plant the seeds of survival. The wilderness itself is both ally and adversary. Trees provide cover but also block vision. Snow hides tracks but slows movement. Rivers can hide a body temporarily but create dangerous obstacles. Every element of the environment amplifies fear while testing resilience. Hansen, ever methodical, uses these natural tools as extensions of his control, turning the Alaskan landscape into a stage for terror and psychological dominance.
Anchorage, in the late 1970s and 1980s, is a city on the edge of wilderness, where urban life blends with the sprawling Alaskan frontier. Missing women reports trickle in sporadically at first, dismissed as voluntary disappearances or accidents. But gradually patterns begin to emerge. Investigators notice common threads: young women, often marginalized, last seen near the city, but vanishing without a trace. The pieces do not yet form a clear picture, but the threads hint at a predator with a methodical approach, an intimate knowledge of both city and wilderness. The investigative process is painstaking. Officers interview friends, family, and neighbors, piecing together timelines and sightings. Witnesses describe women seen entering cars or leaving areas they normally would not. Each account adds texture, but connecting these fragments requires patience and ingenuity. Investigators map last known locations, overlaying roads, forests, and Hansen's daily routines, searching for correlations between disappearances and areas of accessibility. The scale of Alaska's wilderness complicates matters. Snow erases tracks, forests hide evidence, and rivers carry clues far from the origin. Hansen's dual life works against the investigation. By day, he is a benign, polite baker, visible and familiar to the community. By night, he vanishes into the wilderness with abducted women, leaving no immediate evidence. His meticulous planning ensures few witnesses to the abductions themselves. But subtle patterns begin to emerge. His victims often had connections to the city's red light areas, and their absences coincide with periods when Hansen is unaccounted for. Investigators begin to triangulate these patterns, creating a map that slowly reveals his hunting grounds. Forensic work becomes critical. Abandoned personal items, discarded clothing, and shallow snow prints provide clues that are painstakingly analyzed. Tracks in snow, disturbed underbrush, and even subtle deviations in forest paths become data points. Investigators document everything, constructing a pattern of predation with the painstaking patience of a hunter themselves. It is a game of strategy. Every piece of evidence is a breadcrumb, every observation a potential breakthrough. Meanwhile, survivors' testimonies, when they exist, offer the most vivid details. Their accounts of abduction, flight, and fear reveal not only the brutality of Hansen's methods, but also the meticulous control he exerted over each hunt. They describe frozen forests, rivers that impede escape, trees that both conceal and trap, and the omnipresent shadow of Hansen tracking their movements. Their stories provide the investigators with context, helping them to understand the predator's psychology, his patterns, and his predictable behaviors in the wilderness. As the evidence mounts, law enforcement begins to piece together Hansen's dual existence. His bakery, once an innocuous fixture of the community, becomes a hub of interest. Surveillance, witness accounts, and cross-referencing missing women with Hansen's known locations reveal a chilling correlation. Investigators examine maps and photographs found at Hansen's cabin, connecting previous disappearances to specific forested areas, rivers, and isolated trails. The realization crystallizes. The predator is not merely opportunistic. He is methodical, calculating, and deeply familiar with both the wilderness and the human psyche. The process of linking individual cases into a coherent narrative is painstaking. Detectives review timelines, re-interview witnesses, and cross-check reported sightings. Each missing person report becomes a piece of a larger puzzle. Each forensic detail, a thread leading toward the predator. The scale of the task is daunting. Decades of abductions, each executed with meticulous planning, hidden in the vast, indifferent Alaskan landscape. Yet through persistence and methodical investigation, the authorities begin to construct a map of terror, revealing both the scope of Hansen's crimes and the precision of his hunting methods. By the time investigators close in, the evidence is irrefutable. Photographs, maps, survivors' testimonies, abandoned tracks, and discarded items converge to identify Robert Hansen as the orchestrator of a decade-long reign of terror. The duality of his life, polite baker by day, predator by night, underscores the calculated patience with which he operated, and the meticulous nature of his planning ensures a chilling clarity. The predator's intelligence and obsession elevated his hunting to a near-scientific methodology.
The forest is silent, yet every sound screams danger. Snow crunches underfoot, each step announcing presence.
Wind whips through the trees, carrying scents, masking others, and creating illusions of movement. For Hansen's victims, the wilderness is both barrier and battlefield. Every step forward is a battle against exhaustion, frostbite, and paralyzing fear. Every rustle of a branch, every snap of ice underfoot becomes a potential harbinger of death. One young woman, barely 18, stumbles through snowdrifts, clothing soaked, boots heavy with ice. She is disoriented, unsure of direction, and haunted by the echo of a rifle shot fired moments before. Her chest heaves, lungs burning in the freezing air, but she presses on, knowing that stillness guarantees capture. Hansen, patient and precise, follows at a distance, observing, tracking, calculating. His presence is an invisible weight, an omnipresent shadow guiding fear, manipulating movement, and stripping away hope. Another victim hides behind a snow-laden spruce, pressing herself into the cold ground. Frost forms on eyelashes and eyebrows, skin numbed by exposure. Every instinct screams to move, but moving risks discovery. She watches as the shadow of Hansen's figure passes, barely visible through dense trees. The rifle, once fired as a warning, remains in his hands, a constant threat. Minutes stretch into hours, the forest compressing time, heightening fear. Her mind cycles through survival strategies: follow a stream, head downhill, hide in a ravine. Every choice carries peril. Every decision could mean life or death. Hansen's psychological manipulation is relentless. He alternates proximity and absence, shooting near but not at, whispering through distance, or leaving subtle signs of his presence: a boot print, a bent branch, a disturbed snowdrift. The victim's mind begins to fracture under the pressure. Exhaustion, fear, and isolation erode confidence and clarity. Yet resilience surfaces in fleeting moments. A hidden path is discovered, a shallow river is used to mask tracks, and a fallen tree provides momentary shelter. These small acts of ingenuity, courage, and survival are the seeds that will carry some through to rescue. Some victims are captured, bound, and released multiple times. The pattern is chilling: physical restraint, forced navigation through dangerous terrain, and psychological terror designed to break resistance and assert dominance. The forest becomes a maze, the snow a trap, and the predator's presence a constant reminder of vulnerability. Victims recount freezing nights curled under snow-covered roots, hearing distant sounds of movement, rifles firing as warnings, and the slow, omnipresent stalking that makes the forest feel alive with threat. One particularly harrowing escape unfolds along a frozen river. Exhausted and bleeding from minor injuries, the victim uses her knowledge of terrain to mislead Hansen. She jumps between ice floes, splashing frigid water over tracks, masking her scent, and slipping silently into underbrush. Hansen follows, but miscalculates a bend in the river, allowing the victim to gain distance. She collapses on the bank, shivering uncontrollably, lungs burning, heart racing. Each step of this escape is etched into memory, a calculated balance of fear, determination, and desperate intuition. In some cases, survival comes through interaction with locals or chance encounters. A lost victim stumbles onto a logging road, flagging down a passing vehicle, breaking through isolation into human contact. Others endure days in the wilderness, following instinct, observing predator behavior, and exploiting momentary lapses in Hansen's control. Every story is a testament to resilience, courage forged in terror, ingenuity emerging from desperation, and the unyielding will to survive despite unimaginable odds.
Hansen's cruelty is heightened by his intimate knowledge of the terrain. He anticipates hiding spots, paths to water, and locations that amplify exhaustion or fear. Yet the combination of human ingenuity and instinct occasionally counters his precision. Survivors' resourcefulness, hiding under snow-laden branches, masking tracks with river currents, and exploiting lapses in vigilance, turns his calculated terror into temporary vulnerability, creating moments where escape, though harrowing, becomes possible. By the end of these sequences, the forest has become a crucible. Victims emerge physically battered, mentally scarred, yet alive. Their survival provides investigators with critical insight into Hansen's methods, patterns, hunting grounds, psychological manipulation, and the lengths of his predatory obsession. Each escape reinforces a chilling truth. The predator's power was immense, but human resilience, courage, and ingenuity could pierce even the most meticulously planned system of terror.
Beneath the polite exterior of Anchorage's baker lies a mind meticulously structured around control, power, and compulsion. Robert Hansen's childhood, though outwardly unremarkable, reveals seeds of his later obsession. Born into a household marked by neglect and emotional absence, he experienced early feelings of invisibility, rejection, and isolation. These formative experiences shaped his understanding of relationships, dominance, and the need to assert control over others, particularly those he perceived as vulnerable. Hansen's fascination with hunting began innocuously: small game, birds, and later, larger animals. He learned to track, anticipate behavior, and exert power over prey. Over time, this skill set became a psychological framework he would later apply to humans. Hunting was no longer a pastime. It was a template for dominance, a means to transform fear, control, and pursuit into a systematized practice. His empathy, if ever present, eroded, replaced by an analytical, almost scientific understanding of predation. During his abductions, Hansen's mind operates like a predator's laboratory. Every action is deliberate, every choice calculated, each step in the forest a test of endurance, obedience, and terror. He observes reactions with cold precision: the widening of eyes, the shiver of exhaustion, the subtle hesitation at a forked path. He notes weaknesses, adjusts pursuit strategies, and manipulates the environment to amplify fear. His enjoyment is not casual. It is methodical, derived from exercising absolute control over another human being. His obsession escalates over years. Initially, he selects women opportunistically, but over time, the pattern becomes ritualized: planning routes, stocking equipment, cataloging photographs, and mapping the wilderness. Each hunt reinforces his compulsion, validating his sense of power, while the forest becomes a private stage for his calculated exercises in domination. This obsession is intertwined with control, sadism, and meticulous record-keeping, evidence of a mind that merges predatory instinct with obsessive precision. The psychological profile of Hansen is chilling in its clarity. He exhibits traits of narcissism, sadistic obsession, and meticulous planning. His ability to maintain a dual life, the polite, unassuming baker in public, the predator orchestrating hunts in secret, is a testament to his cognitive compartmentalization. Every detail in his cabin, every item used for abduction, every photograph and map reinforces the systematic nature of his obsession. The forest, the snow, and the frozen rivers are instruments of terror, extensions of his calculated control. Flashbacks to childhood experiences offer insight into his compulsions. Rejection, invisibility, and early failures are refracted into a need to dominate.
The animals he hunted became proxies for control, their predictable patterns teaching lessons he would later apply to humans. Every failure, every moment of vulnerability experienced in youth is transformed into precision, patience, and ruthless efficiency. The hunter's mind is formed, calculating, remorseless, and capable of extreme cruelty cloaked in normalcy. Hansen's escalating obsession is mirrored in the survivor's narratives. The terror he inflicts is not merely physical. It is a reflection of the predator's mind at work, each action designed to strip away autonomy, induce fear, and assert psychological dominance. The forest becomes a laboratory, the prey a subject, and each hunt an experiment in control. His meticulous record-keeping, photographs, maps, and notes demonstrate a mind obsessed with documentation, analysis, and repetition. By the time investigators close in, Hansen's inner world is fully revealed. A predator who transforms trauma, obsession, and compulsion into a systematic method of terror. Each hunt, each abduction, each act of stalking is informed by both environment and psychology. He is not impulsive, he is deliberate. Not chaotic, he is precise. Not ordinary, he is a predator whose dual life underscores the chilling capacity for human cunning, cruelty, and control.
The net closes slowly but inexorably. Years of careful investigation, witness statements, forensic analysis, maps, and survivor accounts finally converge to identify Robert Hansen as the predator haunting Anchorage's edges and the surrounding wilderness. Each thread of evidence, painstakingly gathered, reveals a chillingly precise pattern: the timing of disappearances, the geographic clustering, and the predictable hunting grounds. Hansen, meticulous as ever, is unaware that his own obsession with documentation has provided the investigators with the blueprint needed to end his reign. When law enforcement confronts him, the contrast between his public and private personas is stark. To the world, Hansen is the soft-spoken baker, polite and composed, a fixture of ordinary life. Behind closed doors, the evidence of years of calculated predation, photographs, maps, lists, and hunting notes paints a chilling picture of obsession and cruelty. Every detail meticulously maintained for his own perverse satisfaction now serves as undeniable proof of guilt. The courtroom becomes a stage for the culmination of years of terror and trauma. Survivors testify, recounting the chilling sequence of abductions, the frozen forests, the relentless stalking, and the psychological manipulation that characterized Hansen's hunts. Their voices, tinged with fear, resilience, and courage, convey not just the brutality of his acts, but also the depth of human endurance. Photographs, maps, and forensic evidence lay bare the calculated nature of each crime, emphasizing the predator's methodical, obsessive precision. The prosecution presents a meticulous narrative, tracing Hansen's methods, hunting patterns, and psychological profile. They demonstrate how he selected victims, transported them into isolation, and orchestrated hunts designed to instill terror and assert dominance. The court is shown the duality of his life: the baker who kneaded dough by day and stalked humans through snow-laden forests by night. The evidence is overwhelming and the pattern undeniable. Hansen's calm, measured demeanor in court contrasts sharply with the harrowing accounts presented, heightening the chilling realization of his dual existence. Sentencing is decisive. Multiple life terms ensure that Hansen can never harm another human being. The judge emphasizes the meticulous planning, the prolonged terror inflicted, and the psychological cruelty inherent in Hansen's crimes. The courtroom, once a vessel of fear and revelation, becomes a symbol of justice and closure, both for survivors and for a community traumatized by the predator who once moved unseen among them. Even in incarceration, Hansen's legacy endures. His crimes serve as a case study in predator psychology, forensic methodology, and investigative persistence. Law enforcement agencies continue to study his patterns, mapping behavioral clues and environmental strategies to better understand how predators exploit both isolation and human vulnerability. Survivor stories provide insight into resilience, courage, and ingenuity, offering lessons in human endurance and the capacity to survive against overwhelming odds. The wilderness, once a theater for Hansen's hunts, remains silent. Rivers run cold, forests stretch endlessly, and snow blankets the landscape in quiet indifference. Yet the echo of terror lingers, a testament to the meticulous cruelty and obsessive precision of one man's capacity for control. The survivor's courage, the investigator's patience, and the public reckoning all stand as enduring reminders of the human response to evil, vigilance, resilience, and justice. Robert Hansen, the butcher-baker, is gone from the streets and forests of Alaska, but his story endures as a chilling example of predation, duality, and obsession. The forests that once concealed him now stand as witnesses to the meticulous planning, psychological terror, and human resilience that defined one of America's most notorious and calculated serial killers.
If you enjoyed today's video, we thank you very much. Please like and subscribe to Rare Breed Chronicles. And let's dive into another story that defies the ordinary.
The New Mexico desert has always swallowed secrets. Its heat scorches the earth by day, and its silence at night feels endless. Out here, a body can vanish. Out here, bones can turn to dust before anyone even notices a person is gone. On March 22, 1999, the desert gave up one of its secrets. In the small town of Truth or Consequences, a woman sprinted down the dirt road, barefoot, bloodied, and completely naked. Her wrists were raw, her ankles bruised. Around her neck was a heavy iron slave collar, locked tight with a chain still dangling from it. She screamed for help, banging on the door of the first home she could find. The family inside opened the door to a nightmare, a woman in chains, terrified and begging for her life. Her name was Cynthia Vigil, and her story would uncover one of the most disturbing crimes in American history. The man who had chained Cynthia in the desert was David Parker Ray. On the surface, Ray seemed ordinary, a 59-year-old mechanic who worked for the State Park Service at Elephant Butte Lake. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, maybe a little withdrawn. He lived in a modest trailer. He fixed boats. He waved hello at the gas station. But behind the locked doors of that trailer, he had built something monstrous. It was soundproofed, fortified. Inside, the walls were lined with torture instruments. There were whips and clamps, chains bolted to the ceiling, hooks and pulleys, medical scalpels laid out like surgical tools. And in the center, a gynecologist's chair, its leather straps worn from use, bolted firmly to the floor. Above it, a mirror, so victims were forced to watch what was being done to them. But the most chilling item in that room wasn't a weapon. It was a cassette tape. On it was a recording,
Ray's own voice, calm and detached, a message he played to women as they woke up, chained and disoriented. "Hello there, bitch," the tape begins. "You're probably thinking this is a dream. It's not. You're here to be used. From now on, you'll be kept naked and chained like the dog that you are. You're going to be raped in every way I can think of, and in ways you can't imagine. It's going to be painful. It's going to be terrifying, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." This was not a man improvising violence. This was a man following a script. David Parker Ray's obsession with sadism began early. He grew up in a broken home. His father was violent, his mother absent. As a teenager, Ray was shy, socially awkward, unable to connect with girls his age. Instead, he buried himself in fantasies. In his notebooks, he sketched women tied to racks, drawn in cages, restrained with whips and chains. These weren't crude doodles. They were detailed blueprints. The beginnings of what would one day become the toy box. Over the decades, those fantasies grew. He joined sadomasochistic groups, explored bondage clubs, and collected pornography focused on torture and domination. But Ray wasn't satisfied with fantasy. He wanted control in reality. By the 1880s and 90s, he was building the chamber he'd imagined since boyhood. Piece by piece, tool by tool, he engineered his perfect dungeon. And he didn't work alone. His daughter, Glenda Jessie Ray, helped.
For years, women disappeared around Elephant Butte Lake. Some families reported daughters or sisters who never came home. Others simply vanished into the desert without a trace. Those who escaped alive often carried only broken memories, flashes of restraints, blinding lights, surgical instruments. Ray was methodical. He drugged his victims with powerful sedatives like sodium pentothal and phenobarbital, enough to keep them conscious but pliable, enough to blur their memories. He called his victims packages. To him, they weren't people, they were objects. The disappearances didn't attract much attention. Many of the victims were sex workers or women with histories of drug use, people society too often dismissed. Even when women reported strange, hazy experiences of being chained and assaulted, police dismissed them as unreliable. And so, Ray continued, for decades. On March 22, 1999, everything changed. Cynthia Vigil was working the streets in Albuquerque when she was approached by Cindy Hendy. Hendy offered drugs and safety, coaxing Cynthia into Ray's RV. The door locked behind her, and Cynthia realized too late that she had been trapped. She was transported to the toy box, chained, stripped, forced to listen to the tape. For 3 days, she was tortured. Ray used whips, shock devices, medical tools. Hendy watched, sometimes assisting, sometimes laughing. But Cynthia never gave up. On the 3rd day, Hendy made a mistake. She left the keys unattended. Cynthia seized her chance. She lunged at Hendy, smashing a lamp across her head. Hendy collapsed, blood streaming down her face. Cynthia grabbed the keys, unlocked her chains, and ripped the collar free from the wall. She bolted through the door, half naked, collar still clanging around her neck. She ran until she found a home. She screamed until someone opened the door. Her escape ended David Parker Ray's reign of terror. When police raided Ray's trailer, even hardened investigators froze at what they saw. The walls covered in tools of torture,
The chair bolted to the floor, the cameras, the tape, the diary. The diary alone was a horror story. Hundreds of pages where Ray described abductions, assaults, experiments. He wrote in clinical detail, cataloging his victims, recording dates and methods. But there were no names and no bodies. Authorities searched Elephant Butte Lake for remains, convinced that Ray had dumped his victims there. Divers combed the water. Cadaver dogs swept the shorelines. Nothing was found. Without bodies, proving murder would be difficult. But prosecutors had Cynthia. They had the tape, and they had the toy box itself. Ray was arrested, along with Cindy Hendy and his daughter, Jessie. The trial that followed horrified the public. Cynthia Vigil took the stand, describing her escape in chilling detail. Other women came forward, telling fragments of their own experiences in the toy box. Some broke down mid-testimony, unable to continue. Hendy, desperate for leniency, turned on Ray. She described how she had helped him lure women, how she had watched him.
The trial that followed was exhaustive. Survivors described their experiences in vivid detail, creating a narrative of horror and methodical cruelty. Hendy and Jessie corroborated testimonies, confirming their roles in maintaining the toy box. Evidence included photographs, diaries, instruments, and cassette tapes, documenting a system of torture and control refined over decades. Ray's calm demeanor in court, his meticulous documentation, and lack of remorse underscored the depth of his pathology. The prosecution depicted a predator who had transformed decades of obsession into systematic, ritualized terror. Ray was sentenced to multiple decades in prison, ensuring he would never harm another victim. Hendy received a reduced sentence for cooperation, and Jessie was similarly sentenced. Ray died in 2002, leaving unanswered questions about the full scope of his crimes and countless unidentified victims. Even decades later, the desert around Elephant Butte remains silent and indifferent, yet the toy box's legacy endures. Survivors' courage, law enforcement diligence, and the psychological study of Ray's methods serve as reminders of the extremes of human cruelty. The toy box is gone, but its imprint remains, a chilling testament to a man who lived among ordinary people while orchestrating extraordinary terror.
If you enjoyed today's video, we thank you very much. Please like and subscribe to Rare Breed Chronicles. And let's dive into another story that defies the ordinary.
Boston, Massachusetts, 2009. The city hums with the rhythm of college life, bustling streets, and the quiet pulse of ambition. In the midst of it lives Philip Markoff, a 23-year-old medical student at Boston University, whose life seems scripted for success. Tall, handsome, and impeccably groomed, Philip embodies the image of the ideal young professional. His classmates admire him. Professors praise his intellect and dedication. Friends describe him as charming, polite, and ambitious, a man with a future bright enough to illuminate every room he enters. Philip's personal life mirrors his public image. He's engaged to Megan McAllister, a young woman who matches his poise and social grace. Their relationship is devoted, picture-perfect, a partnership built on mutual respect, or so it seems. They live together in a tidy, modern Boston apartment, the kind of space that screams stability and order. To anyone looking from the outside, Philip's life is enviable. Academic achievement, social approval, and a loving partner. Every detail is controlled, polished, rehearsed.
But beneath the carefully constructed facade, an invisible line divides Philip's world. One side is public, the side everyone sees: the ambitious medical student, the loving fiancé, the polite young man walking confidently through the city streets. The other side is hidden, darker, almost impossible to reconcile with the person the world knows. This hidden side will eventually shock a city, a country, and the very people who loved him. The first signs are subtle. Law enforcement begins investigating a string of disturbing assaults in Boston, all tied to Craigslist. Young women report being lured to their apartments by advertisements promising massage services. Once inside, they are overpowered, tied up, robbed, and terrorized. The attacks are unnervingly consistent, suggesting a meticulous planner who understands psychology, timing, and trust. Detectives notice patterns. The victims are selected carefully, the methods precise, the escape calculated. The perpetrator doesn't rush. He strikes with planning, using his charm and calm demeanor to disarm the women before violence erupts. Each incident leaves behind questions that are hard to answer. Who is this person? How can they be so normal on the surface, yet capable of such calculated aggression? At first, no one suspects Philip Markoff. He's a student, a familiar face in classrooms and cafes. He helps classmates with study sessions, laughed easily in social circles, and maintains the image of the perfect, polite young man. The contrast between his public persona and the terror in the victim's stories is almost cinematic. A man walking unnoticed, blending seamlessly into a city that never suspects him. Philip's dual existence is revealed slowly, piece by piece. Friends and family notice oddities, moments when he disappears unexpectedly, brief phone calls he guards jealously, hints of secretive behavior. But the signs are subtle enough that they are dismissed: stress from school, pressure from med school exams, the occasional need for privacy. No one can imagine that behind the mask of normalcy he is actively planning violent assaults. As investigators dig deeper, digital breadcrumbs emerge. Craigslist ads, payment records, and timestamps reveal a chilling picture. Someone intelligent, methodical, and calculating. Someone capable of leading a double life. And the evidence begins to point, inexorably, toward Philip Markoff. This is where the tension escalates. The idea that someone so admired, so loved, could be responsible for these assaults creates a psychological unease that reverberates throughout the city. Friends struggle to reconcile the reality with the image they held. Professors question their own judgment. Family members grapple with denial and disbelief. Boston itself, a city known for its education and sophistication, begins to understand that evil can hide behind the most familiar face. The horror of Philip's hidden life lies not just in the assaults themselves, but in the terrifying ease with which he maintains his deception. By day, he is the aspiring doctor, the dutiful fiancé, the model student. By night, he becomes the predator, methodically targeting women, exploiting trust, and avoiding detection with almost clinical precision. The duality is surreal. It reads like fiction, yet every element is real, documented, and terrifying. As August 2009 unfolds, the city edges closer to confrontation. Each day brings more victims, more evidence, and a growing sense of dread. Philip Markoff's perfect life is a veneer, and beneath it, a darkness spreads like a shadow over Boston. The story is no longer just about assaults or Craigslist ads. It becomes about a city's trust betrayed, the fragility of appearances, and the terrifying question of how well we really know the people around us. By the end of this act, the audience is left suspended on the edge of disbelief. Philip Markoff is charming, brilliant, and dangerous. His life appears ordinary, yet every detail is part of a carefully orchestrated dual existence. The tension mounts because everyone knows, even if they don't yet understand, that the perfect life is about to unravel in ways that will shock the city, the nation, and all who thought they knew him.
Boston, late 2009. The city, unaware of the full scope of the danger, is settling into its usual rhythm. Students move between lecture halls, professionals rush down streets, and neighborhoods hum with ordinary life. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, a predator walks among them, carefully hidden behind a mask of charm and ambition. The first official reports trickle in. Women assaulted after responding to Craigslist ads offering massage services. Initially, police see them as isolated incidents, strange but not necessarily linked. Yet subtle details hint at something more. Each victim describes a man who is polite, well-spoken, calculated, someone who seems familiar, even trustworthy. The attacks follow a pattern. Entries through unlocked doors, swift overpowering, precise binding, and theft. There is no unnecessary violence beyond control. No one is killed, but each victim is terrorized, leaving psychological scars that will last a lifetime. Detectives begin connecting the dots. Phone records, email addresses, and timestamps form a web pointing toward one suspect. They cross-reference the descriptions with individuals in the area who fit the profile: young, educated, technologically adept, and seemingly ordinary. It is a list of people Boston knows well, but only one name begins to emerge with disturbing clarity: Philip Markoff. Investigators begin surveillance. They note his meticulous routines, his calculated movements, his careful maintenance of the perfect image. From the outside, he is exemplary. He attends medical lectures, studies late into the night, and shares quiet evenings with his fiancée. But in the background, a digital footprint reveals a darker side. Craigslist activity tied to his identity, ads carefully placed, a series of deceptions layered over everyday life. The contrast is jarring. To the public, Markoff is the ideal student, diligent, polite, ambitious. To law enforcement, he is methodical, cunning, and dangerous. The tension rises as authorities realize the predator is not some stranger in the shadows, but a man who could walk past anyone on the street, blending seamlessly with normalcy. Every encounter he has could be a potential crime. Every movement is scrutinized, yet he remains undetected, walking a tightrope of dual lives. As the investigation intensifies, the psychological toll on those close to him becomes apparent. Friends, classmates, and family members begin questioning memories, small inconsistencies, and unexplained behavior. Megan McAllister, his fiancée, notices subtle shifts, unusual secrecy, defensiveness about late-night activities, and strange phone calls he cannot explain. Yet even she cannot imagine the scope of what is happening. Meanwhile, detectives work tirelessly, piecing together timelines and digital evidence. Credit card records, email chains, and phone logs converge to reveal a chilling picture. The attacks are not random. They are premeditated, calculated, and executed with a terrifying level of control. Each Craigslist ad, each victim interaction, each escape is a meticulously planned sequence designed to manipulate trust and exploit opportunity. The city itself feels the mounting tension. Media coverage begins to intensify, painting a picture of a predator who lurks behind the ordinary, a man whose intelligence and charm mask a disturbing capacity for violence. Boston watches in unease, realizing that safety is fragile, that danger can hide in plain sight. And then comes the break. Investigators discover a link between Philip and one of the most recent victims, a digital trail, seemingly small, almost trivial, but enough to confirm suspicions. A sting is planned, evidence is gathered, and the net begins to tighten around him. Markoff's world, once controlled and perfect, begins to collapse. The careful balance between his two lives starts to wobble. Every calculated move he made, every deception he relied on, is now under scrutiny. And while he may not know it yet, the trap is closing. The tension reaches its peak as law enforcement prepares for confrontation. Philip Markoff, the model student and beloved fiancé, is on the brink of exposure. His life, carefully constructed and polished, is about to shatter, revealing the dark reality lurking beneath the surface. The city of Boston, already unnerved, braces for the shock of seeing a man who seemed untouchable brought to justice.
Boston, 2009. The city hums with life, unaware that the net of justice is closing in on one of its most unassuming residents. Philip Markoff, the handsome, polite, ambitious medical student, has carefully maintained his perfect image, hiding a dark double life behind smiles, charm, and dedication to his studies. But every deception leaves a trace, and authorities are now poised to unravel the truth. It begins quietly. Detectives move methodically, piecing together digital evidence, victim statements, and behavioral patterns. Every email, every Craigslist post, every financial transaction is scrutinized, revealing a meticulously orchestrated trail that leads straight to him. The tension builds with each piece of evidence, like a clock winding down toward an inevitable confrontation. On the day of his arrest, Philip leaves his apartment, unaware that law enforcement is waiting. Officers surround his residence, carefully coordinated to avoid public chaos. He is approached calmly, almost politely, but the detective's presence is firm and unyielding. The reality crashes down. The man who seemed untouchable, the student who could walk any hallway unnoticed, is now caught in the light of scrutiny. As he is read his rights, the city begins to grasp the shocking duality of his existence. For neighbors, classmates, and friends, the revelation is surreal. They had seen him in classrooms, cafes, and apartment hallways, a picture of normalcy, never suspecting the hidden life that included manipulation, assault, and premeditated violence. The betrayal is visceral, the cognitive dissonance profound. In interrogation rooms, the facade begins to crumble. Philip is questioned about each assault, each Craigslist advertisement, each meticulously executed crime. His demeanor alternates between composed and evasive, a mixture of intelligence and discomfort, charm and detachment. Investigators uncover the methods he used to lure victims, exploit trust, and avoid suspicion. The revelations are both chilling and fascinating. A young man, brilliant and seemingly ordinary, capable of calculated violence with terrifying ease. The media seizes upon the story, broadcasting it nationwide. Boston watches in shock as the details emerge. The carefully constructed Craigslist ads, the premeditated attacks, the betrayal of trust. The narrative is gripping because it defies expectation.
A medical student, engaged and ambitious, is revealed as a predator, a man capable of deception on a level that seems almost unreal. Public reaction is a mixture of horror and disbelief. Friends of the victims grapple with trauma and fear. Family members of Philip struggle with denial, unable to reconcile the image of the son, brother, or fiancé they knew with the perpetrator revealed by law enforcement. Psychologists dissect the case, probing the nature of dual lives, obsession, and hidden pathology. As the investigation closes, the scale of Philip Markoff's crimes becomes clear. He is linked to multiple assaults, each calculated, each executed with precision. The city of Boston realizes how close they came to overlooking a predator who blended seamlessly into everyday life. The shocking twist is not just his guilt, but the terrifying normalcy of the man behind the crimes. Boston, 2010. The city that once admired Philip Markoff as a bright, ambitious medical student now watches as he faces the consequences of a life built on deception, violence, and hidden obsession. The courtroom is packed, media cameras trained on every movement, and the tension is palpable. This is no ordinary trial. It is a study in duality, betrayal, and the dark extremes of human behavior. From the opening statements, the prosecution paints a chilling portrait. Philip is not just accused of assault, he is accused of leading a secret life as a calculated predator. The evidence is meticulous. Emails, Craigslist postings, bank transactions, and victim testimonies all converge to reveal a man who manipulated trust and orchestrated violence with cold precision. Each piece of evidence serves as a spotlight, illuminating the contrast between his public facade and his hidden darkness. Victims testify, their voices trembling yet determined. They recount moments that seem almost cinematic in their terror. The polite greeting, the initial trust, the sudden realization of danger, and the physical and psychological control Philip exerted. Each story adds layers to the narrative, showing not only the crimes themselves, but the psychological damage left in their wake. The courtroom is silent, absorbed in the tension of each testimony, each revelation heightening the sense of disbelief. As the trial progresses, shocking twists emerge. Friends and family of Philip describe a man who seemed flawless, yet investigators reveal moments of manipulation, secrecy, and deceit that no one could have anticipated. Even those closest to him are forced to confront the possibility that they never truly knew him. The dual life he led, medical student by day, predator by night, becomes the central enigma, a psychological puzzle that fascinates and horrifies. The defense argues that Philip's actions were influenced by stress, personal pressure, and moments of poor judgment, attempting to mitigate the perception of calculated malice. But the prosecution dismantles this narrative with precision. Digital evidence shows premeditation, careful planning, and conscious manipulation. The contrast between his public persona and criminal actions is undeniable. Every tactic, every move, every Craigslist post is proof of intent. As the trial reaches its climax, the courtroom grapples with the emotional weight of the case. The media captures the collective shock of a city coming to terms with the truth. Families of victims find a measure of closure, yet the psychological scars remain. Friends and colleagues of Philip are left questioning the nature of trust and appearances, while society at large contemplates the unsettling lesson that someone can hide immense darkness behind an ordinary, even charming exterior.
Boston,
years after Philip Markoff's arrest and conviction, remains haunted not just by the crimes themselves, but by the surreal duality of the man who committed them. A city that once admired him as a brilliant, ambitious medical student now grapples with the unsettling truth that appearances can be deadly deceiving. The story of Philip Markoff is no longer just about assaults or legal proceedings. It is about trust betrayed, the fragility of perception, and the dark corridors of human psychology. For the victims, life moves forward cautiously. Each carries the scars of fear, the trauma of betrayal, and the memory of a man who seemed ordinary, familiar, and safe, only to reveal a calculated, predatory side. Therapy sessions, interviews, and public statements reflect the resilience of those affected, but also the lingering horror of realizing how close normal life and terror can coexist. Friends and family of Philip are left in disbelief, attempting to reconcile the charming, intelligent young man they knew with the predator exposed in court. The cognitive dissonance is profound. How could someone so polite, so ambitious, so seemingly devoted to his fiancée lead a secret life that included violence and deception? The question lingers, unanswered, a chilling reminder of the gaps between perception and reality. Psychologists and criminologists examine the case extensively. Philip Markoff becomes a textbook study in duality, narcissism, and calculated manipulation. Experts analyze the careful orchestration of his crimes, the premeditation, and the psychological mechanisms that allowed him to maintain a flawless public persona while committing calculated assaults. Each revelation offers insight into human behavior, but also a reminder of how easily trust can be exploited. The media coverage continues to echo the shock felt by Boston and the nation. Stories, documentaries, and articles dissect every detail. The Craigslist ads, the careful planning, the seemingly ordinary life, the sudden unmasking. The case becomes a cautionary tale, a real-life thriller that blurs the line between normalcy and danger, intellect and malice. Even years later, the narrative retains its haunting resonance. Philip Markoff's story forces society to confront uncomfortable truths. That deception can hide behind charm. That evil can walk unnoticed in familiar places. And that the line between ordinary life and terror is sometimes alarmingly thin. The legacy is psychological, societal, and profoundly human. A reminder that the most shocking stories are not always found in fiction, but in the calculated, hidden darkness of real life. In the end, the Craigslist killer case is more than a crime story. It is a portrait of deception, a study in duality, and a chilling reminder that appearances can be fatal. Boston, the victims, and the world are left to reckon with the unnerving truth that sometimes those we think we know best are capable of actions we cannot imagine, and the shadows of their deeds linger long after the courtroom lights have dimmed.
If you enjoyed today's video, we thank you very much. Please like and subscribe to Rare Breed Chronicles. And let's dive into another story that defies the ordinary. London, late 1970s. The city pulses with life. The The fog rolls along cobblestone streets. Pubs spill laughter and smoke into the alleys. Neon signs flicker outside late-night shops, and a restless energy hums beneath the city's mundane routines. In this maze of ordinary lives lives Dennis Nilsen, a man whose presence is nearly invisible, blending into the rhythm of buses, office corridors, and quiet apartments. Tall, polite, meticulous, the kind of man neighbors would barely notice. He works at the home office, a structured life of files and bureaucracy, and returns each evening to his modest flat in Muswell Hill. He greets neighbors with a nod, smiles at colleagues, never raising suspicion. Yet beneath this calm exterior is a mind teeming with obsession and dark impulses, a man who meticulously balances a public life of normalcy with a private existence of terror. From his apartment window, Dennis watches the city. People walking alone, couples laughing, men lingering on street corners. He notices the vulnerable, the overlooked, the lonely. He identifies patterns. Who might trust a polite stranger? Who might not be immediately missed if they vanish? Every interaction outside his flat is a rehearsal, a subtle test of his ability to lure, charm, and control without detection. Inside his flat, the atmosphere is quiet, almost sterile. The furniture is orderly, the kitchen immaculate. Yet every object, every shadow is part of his psychological ecosystem. Books on psychology and human behavior line the shelves. Music drifts softly from a record player, classical, jazz, masking the silence that will one day become filled with horror. He carefully maintains this facade, knowing that one misstep could unravel years of planning. Neighbors describe him as polite, solitary, and unassuming. Colleagues see him as a diligent worker, quiet but reliable. No one suspects that beneath this ordinary life, Dennis is preparing the conditions for something unspeakable. Even his few friendships are calculated, interactions designed to confirm his normalcy, to strengthen the mask that conceals the darkness within. Each evening, Dennis's mind oscillates between the mundane and the macabre. He imagines interactions with young men who wander alone through London streets, the conversations he will have, the trust he will cultivate, the way he will isolate them in the controlled space of his flat. The tension is invisible but pervasive. A city unaware that terror lives quietly in its midst. And yet, even in this darkness, there is method and order. Every routine, every visit to the grocery store, every polite exchange is a rehearsal in control, a layer in the carefully constructed life he presents to the world. London, with all its ordinary bustle, is a stage on which Dennis Nilsen quietly perfects his craft, a predator hidden in plain sight.
London, late 1970s. The city pulses with life.
The fog rolls along cobblestone streets. Pubs spill laughter and smoke into the alleys. Neon signs flicker outside late-night shops, and a restless energy hums beneath the city's mundane routines. In this maze of ordinary lives lives Dennis Nilsen, a man whose presence is nearly invisible, blending into the rhythm of buses, office corridors, and quiet apartments. Tall, polite, meticulous, the kind of man neighbors would barely notice. He works at the Home Office, a structured life of files and bureaucracy, and returns each evening to his modest flat in Muswell Hill. He greets neighbors with a nod, smiles at colleagues, never raising suspicion. Yet beneath this calm exterior is a mind teeming with obsession and dark impulses, a man who meticulously balances a public life of normalcy with a private existence of terror. From his apartment window, Dennis watches the city. People walking alone, couples laughing, men lingering on street corners. He notices the vulnerable, the overlooked, the lonely. He identifies patterns. Who might trust a polite stranger? Who might not be immediately missed if they vanish? Every interaction outside his flat is a rehearsal, a subtle test of his ability to lure, charm, and control without detection. Inside his flat, the atmosphere is quiet, almost sterile. The furniture is orderly, the kitchen immaculate. Yet every object, every shadow, is part of his psychological ecosystem. Books on psychology and human behavior line the shelves. Music drifts softly from a record player, classical, jazz, masking the silence that will one day become filled with horror. He carefully maintains this facade, knowing that one misstep could unravel years of planning. Neighbors describe him as polite, solitary, and unassuming. Colleagues see a diligent worker, quiet but reliable. No one suspects that beneath this ordinary life, Dennis is preparing the conditions for something unspeakable. Even his few friendships are calculated, interactions designed to confirm his normalcy, to strengthen the mask that conceals the darkness within. Each evening, Dennis's mind oscillates between the mundane and the macabre. He imagines interactions with young men who wander alone through London streets, the conversations he will have, the trust he will cultivate, the way he will isolate them in the controlled space of his flat. The tension is invisible but pervasive, a city unaware that terror lives quietly in its midst. And yet, even in this darkness, there is method and order. Every routine, every visit to the grocery store, every polite exchange is a rehearsal in control, a layer in the carefully constructed life he presents to the world. London, with all its ordinary bustle, is a stage on which Dennis Nilsen quietly perfects his craft, a predator hidden in plain sight.
London, late evening. The streets are damp, lit by flickering streetlights and the occasional neon glow of a corner shop. Young men wander alone, a mix of tourists, students, and transient workers, many marginalized, many overlooked by society. To most, these streets are merely a passage home. To Dennis Nilsen, they are the hunting ground, the first stage in a meticulously rehearsed performance. He begins small, casual conversations outside pubs, brief exchanges on bus rides, a friendly nod in the park. He observes posture, demeanor,
trustworthiness. He identifies vulnerability, a willingness to accept kindness from a stranger. Each interaction is a test, a psychological probe. The man on the street may be lonely, may crave connection, and Dennis knows exactly how to offer it. Inside his flat, the atmosphere is disarmingly calm. Music drifts from a record player, classical, soothing. Tea simmers on the stove. The apartment is neat, orderly, almost welcoming. Dennis is a master of juxtaposition, the domestic serenity masking the danger that lies within. He prepares, rehearses, and times everything with precision. When a potential victim responds, Dennis acts with practiced charm. Invitations are extended under the guise of friendship. "Come in for a cup of tea," he might say. "I'll show you around." Once inside, the young men are met with warmth, hospitality, and reassurance. The tension rises subtly, a quiet undercurrent. Viewers know the danger, but the victims do not. Dennis studies their responses, gauging trust, weakness, and compliance. Every gesture, every pause, every question is calculated. The predator and the prey dance in this fragile, invisible choreography. He isolates them from the outside world, distractions, conversation, the illusion of safety. The flat becomes a controlled environment, a stage where Dennis orchestrates the next steps of his plan. Once the victim is inside, the psychological manipulation deepens. Dennis uses conversation, subtle persuasion, and his calm demeanor to lull them into a sense of security. He learns their habits, personal details, and vulnerabilities. There is a meticulous layering of trust, a slow unraveling of boundaries that makes the final act of violence possible. Even here, in this intimate setting, Dennis's obsession is revealed. He carefully preserves elements of each encounter, arranging objects, observing shadows, noting reactions. The apartment is not just a home, it is a psychological laboratory, a space where every detail is under his control. The tension escalates not through overt aggression, but through anticipation. The audience senses the danger growing with every polite smile, every cup of tea poured, every casual conversation that conceals the predator's intent. Dennis is patient, deliberate, and chillingly intelligent. The predator in plain sight becomes omnipresent, a quiet terror, invisible to a city that continues its rhythm outside the apartment walls.
The courtroom is heavy with anticipation. Reporters, families, and the public gather, filling the space with the tension that mirrors the city outside, still reeling from the horrors uncovered in Muswell Hill. The trial of Dennis Nilsen begins, a spectacle of human fascination, horror, and disbelief. Here is a man who, for years, lived among ordinary Londoners, polite, unassuming, blending seamlessly into society, and yet the evidence now paints a picture of cold, calculated murder. From the moment proceedings commence, the dichotomy is stark. Dennis appears calm, composed, almost detached. He recounts events with meticulous detail, describing actions that would shock the most seasoned jurors. His demeanor is unnerving, polite inflections, measured pauses, a quiet smile that seems out of place amidst discussions of death, control, and obsession. To those present, it is almost impossible to reconcile the man before them with the atrocities he committed. Forensic evidence dominates the proceedings. Investigators detail the drains, the preserved remains, the chemical treatments, the deliberate concealment of identities. Experts explain the meticulous nature of his actions, the obsessive care, the methodical planning, and the psychological precision that allowed him to maintain a double life for years. Each victim is examined not just as a life taken, but as evidence of a pattern, control, obsession, and meticulous premeditation. Psychologists and criminologists are called to the stand, providing insight into the mind of a man who thrives in duality. They discuss his intelligence, his obsessive tendencies, and the chilling way he compartmentalized his life. Dennis's polite, office-bound persona is contrasted with his nocturnal compulsions, a predator who hid behind civility while orchestrating acts of extreme violence. The courtroom listens, fascinated and horrified, as the expert testimony peels back layer after layer of his psyche. Witnesses recount their experiences, neighbors who describe courteous interactions, colleagues who trusted him implicitly, and survivors who reveal the subtle manipulations Dennis used to gain trust. These stories juxtapose the horror of his crimes with the ordinariness of his public life, creating an unsettling tension. How could someone so polite, so unremarkable, commit such atrocities? The trial becomes more than a legal proceeding. It is a study of human psychology. Each day the media reports the details, and the public becomes both informed and terrified. Families of victims confront the unimaginable reality that someone they may have walked past on the street, smiled at in a shop, or passed in a corridor was capable of such darkness. Dennis's own testimony adds a layer of chilling insight. He speaks of his compulsion with detachment, describing his need for control, the patterns he followed, and the satisfaction he derived from the meticulous execution of his acts. There is no grandiose self-pity, no dramatic confessions seeking sympathy, only calm, precise explanation. It is the composure in recounting horrors that amplifies the terror, the realization that human evil can be measured, calculated, and ordinary in appearance. As the prosecution presents the case, the tension in the courtroom is palpable. Jurors, families, and observers are forced to grapple not only with the scale of the crimes, but with the uncomfortable truth that evil can live quietly, hidden in plain sight. The narrative of Dennis Nilsen becomes a cautionary tale. The ordinary can mask the extraordinary darkness of human nature.
Dennis Nilsen is convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, removed from society, yet his story does not end with the gavel's fall. London, and indeed the world, is left grappling with the chilling realization that someone so ordinary, polite, and unassuming could conceal such calculated horror. The streets where young men once walked freely now carry a subtle, lingering unease. The knowledge that terror can wear the mask of normalcy leaves a permanent imprint on the city's collective consciousness. Families of victims endure a complex grief. Beyond mourning the lives lost, they wrestle with the betrayal of trust, the violation of innocence, and the eerie notion that their loved ones were preyed upon by someone who, to the outside world, seemed harmless. Each story of a victim, once overlooked, now serves a testament to vulnerability, reminding society of the dangers lurking in seemingly mundane encounters. psychologists and criminologists continue to study Nilsen's case, dissecting the duality of his existence. His life becomes a cornerstone in the study of serial offenders, a textbook example of organized, compulsive, and socially integrated predators. Lectures, academic papers, and forensic analyses explore the chilling balance he maintained. The polite civil servant by day, the manipulative, obsessive killer by night. His story challenges assumptions about human behavior, trust, and the ability to hide darkness behind a facade of normalcy.
If you enjoyed today's video, we thank you very much. Please like and subscribe to Rare Breed Chronicles. And let's dive into another story that defies the ordinary.
The highways of Florida stretched endlessly under a scorching sun, asphalt shimmering with heat and the distant hum of traffic. These roads were meant to carry people safely from one town to another, but for Aileen Wuornos, they became a stage for desperation, vengeance, and ultimately, death. Born in 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, Aileen's early life was a portrait of trauma and neglect. Abandoned by her father, subjected to abuse by family members, and thrust into adulthood far too early, her childhood was marked by hardship and instability. By the time she was a teenager, Aileen had experienced more suffering than most endure in a lifetime, a bitter foundation for a life that would spiral into violence. She fled to Florida, searching for stability, money, and independence, but found only more struggle. Living on the margins of society, she turned to sex work as a means of survival. Along the lonely highways, she met men who offered cash in exchange for company, companionship, and sometimes more intimate services. Yet in these encounters, a pattern of manipulation and danger emerged, both from the men she serviced and from the societal forces that ignored her plight. By the late 1980s, Aileen's life had become a mixture of survival and growing anger. She claimed later that her victims were threats, men who had attempted to assault her, rob her, or otherwise harm her. Whether true in every instance or an element of her own narrative, the result was terrifyingly consistent. Men died violently, shot at close range, usually along isolated stretches of Florida highways. The murders began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A trucker, a traveling salesman, a man seeking temporary company. Each victim disappeared, leaving little trace behind. Local law enforcement often wrote these disappearances off as isolated incidents, failing to recognize a pattern. But for those who would later investigate, the connections became chillingly clear. A single woman, operating alone, turning the highways into her hunting grounds, wielding a weapon with deadly precision. Even as the bodies mounted, Aileen's life remained a fragile mixture of poverty, addiction, and fleeting connections. She had a transient network of friends, lovers, and acquaintances who witnessed parts of her life, her outbursts, her charm, her volatility, but few could have predicted the scale of what she would do. The highways, the deserted parking lots, the abandoned rest stops all became silent witnesses to acts of violence that society seemed unwilling to see. And yet Aileen was not simply a monster. She was a product of trauma, circumstance, and societal neglect. Her story is as much about the failings of the system, of law enforcement, social services, and community as it is about the choices she made. The complexity of her psyche, the interplay between survival and aggression would define both her crimes and the fascination they inspired worldwide. By the time her killing spree fully escalated,
Florida highways had become both literal and metaphorical landscapes of terror, roads where trust, hope, and life itself could vanish in an instant. By 1989, Aileen Wuornos' existence had become a dangerous rhythm. The highways stretching endlessly, the sun beating down on asphalt, the hum of passing vehicles masking the tension that accompanied her every encounter. For the men she encountered, what seemed like an ordinary transaction or a fleeting companionship often ended in violence. Her method was chilling in its simplicity and precision. She typically approached men under the guise of sex work, luring them to isolated areas along Florida's rural roads, abandoned rest stops, or secluded parking lots. Once alone, the encounters would turn fatal. She claimed self-defense in many cases, insisting that the men had attempted to assault her or rob her. Whether true or partially fabricated, the result was the same: death by close-range gunfire, leaving her victims sprawled across sand, gravel, or dirt roads, silent witnesses to a pattern that had eluded authorities for months. The killings began sporadically, almost imperceptibly. Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old man, became her first confirmed victim, lured to a remote area where she shot him multiple times. His disappearance drew little attention at first. Missing person reports in Florida often went unresolved, especially when the missing were adults traveling alone. Each subsequent murder followed a similar pattern: David Spears, Charles Carsgadan, Troy Burris, men who disappeared, only to later be found shot to death, evidence pointing to a single perpetrator operating along the highways. As the body count rose, law enforcement slowly began to notice a pattern. The victims were all men, mostly strangers, who vanished along isolated stretches of road in Florida. Witnesses described a woman with striking features, hair often dyed or hidden under hats, who was seen offering rides or companionship to men who would later be found dead. But Aileen's careful planning, mobility, and understanding of the terrain allowed her to evade capture, slipping in and out of towns, blending into transient communities, and using the roads themselves as both hunting ground and escape route. Her life during this period was a precarious balance of survival and rage. She lived out of cars, abandoned buildings, and friends' homes, constantly on the move. Addiction, poverty, and past trauma fueled a volatile temperament that surfaced in both public and private spaces. Those who crossed her path, briefly or intimately, often glimpsed both charm and menace in the same person, a duality that would later captivate and horrify the public. The Florida highways, quiet in the early hours and bustling by day, became theaters of terror. Each murder carried a psychological signature: isolation, close-range execution, and meticulous disposal. Evidence was sparse, often concealed in vegetation or shallow graves, sometimes washed away by rainfall or overlooked by passers-by. In essence, Aileen turned the environment itself into an accomplice. The winding roads, thick foliage, and abandoned areas of Florida hid the traces of her crimes. By the time the first pattern was confirmed, the public was largely unaware of the danger lingering along these stretches of asphalt. Families reported missing loved ones, but few could connect the dots. The media, initially dismissive of the disappearances of middle-aged men along rural roads, gradually began to take notice, reporting sporadically on stranger deaths in Florida. Aileen herself oscillated between fear and audacity. She was aware that the law could catch up to her, yet the combination of anger, survival instinct, and trauma drove her to continue. Her narrative: the men threatened her, they forced her hand, mingled with the cold reality of her actions. 7 confirmed murders,
each executed with methodical precision, leaving an indelible mark on the Florida landscape. By the end of this act, the highways of Florida were no longer just roads. They were stages of terror, silent witnesses to a woman shaped by hardship, trauma, and desperation, who had become a predator in plain sight. The tension now shifted from isolated disappearances to a city and a state beginning to realize that a serial killer moved among them, hunting along the highways and leaving death in his wake.
By the early 1990s, the state of Florida was becoming increasingly uneasy. Reports of missing men, often middle-aged and traveling along rural highways, had begun to surface more frequently. Families of the disappeared grew frustrated with the slow pace of investigations, while law enforcement scrambled to find connections between cases that spanned counties, towns, and stretches of road that seemed endless. For investigators, the breakthrough came through careful pattern recognition. They noticed that the victims shared several similarities. All were men traveling alone. All had last been seen interacting with a woman offering companionship, and all had met violent ends along remote highways. The details were chillingly consistent. The close-range gunshot wounds, the shallow disposal sites, and the fleeting descriptions of a female suspect. Witnesses began coming forward. Truckers, motel clerks, and residents along the highways provided fragmented accounts. A woman offering rides, asking questions, or waiting for customers at roadside stops. Each testimony helped construct a profile. A woman, transient, familiar with the isolated highways, operating with audacity and precision. Law enforcement began to realize they were not dealing with a random killer, but a methodical predator exploiting the vulnerabilities of the men she targeted. Meanwhile, Aileen continued her activities. She lived a precarious life, moving between towns, sometimes staying with acquaintances or friends who provided temporary shelter. She carried weapons, planned encounters, and maintained a veneer of normalcy while executing her crimes. The highways remained her domain, silent and empty at night, but deadly under the guise of chance encounters. The investigation gained momentum when police began connecting physical evidence to missing persons reports. Shell casings, vehicle descriptions, and witness statements coalesced into a clearer picture of her movements. Detectives realized that a single individual was likely responsible for a series of murders that had long confounded the system. But locating her remained a challenge. She was transient, careful, and aware enough to avoid patterns that could lead directly to capture. The tipping point came when Aileen's behavior grew bolder and more erratic. She was increasingly relying on stolen vehicles, changing her appearance and interacting with more people who could testify to her presence. One key encounter involved a potential victim who survived, providing authorities with a vivid description and critical details that helped them track her down. Finally, on January 9, 1991, Aileen Wuornos was arrested in Volusia County, Florida. She had been driving a stolen vehicle, and the circumstances of her apprehension reflected both her desperation and the meticulous work of law enforcement. The arrest was tense. She was combative, defiant, and at times eerily calm, traits that mirrored her complex personality. Once in custody, Aileen's story began to unravel. Investigators confronted her with evidence linking her to multiple murders. She confessed to 7 killings, claiming that each was committed in self-defense against men who had threatened or attacked her. Her confessions, chilling and detailed, provided a window into the mindset of a woman shaped by trauma, fear, and survival instincts, yet capable of lethal violence. The public reaction to her arrest was intense. Headlines painted her as a female serial killer, a rarity in criminal history, and speculation ran rampant about the nature of her crimes. The case drew national attention with debates about morality, gender, and justice, dominating media coverage. Was she a monster, a product of circumstance, or a combination of both? The answers were complex, unsettling, and impossible to ignore. The courtroom in Volusia County was thick with tension, the air heavy with anticipation and grief. Families of the victims filled the benches, some in silence, others shaking with barely contained emotion, their eyes fixed on the woman accused of taking their loved ones from them. Across the room, Aileen Wuornos sat quietly, her demeanor at once detached and inscrutable, a mixture of defiance and fatigue etched into her features. The trial, which began in 1992, was a complex battle of narrative and evidence. Prosecutors meticulously laid out the timeline of her murders, describing each encounter, each isolated highway, and each fatal confrontation. They presented witness testimony, truckers, motel clerks, and surviving acquaintances painting a chilling portrait of a predator who operated under the guise of desperation and vulnerability. Physical evidence played a crucial role. Ballistics linked her handgun to multiple victims, and forensic analysis confirmed the locations and sequences of the killings. Investigators recounted how Aileen had lured men to remote areas, often promising companionship, only to commit murder when she perceived a threat, a defense she would repeatedly assert during the proceedings. The defense, meanwhile, focused on her troubled past. They highlighted decades of trauma, abuse as a child, abandonment, exploitation, and a life lived on society's margins. They argued that her actions were driven not by malice alone, but by fear, desperation, and mental instability. Psychiatric evaluations were presented, offering a glimpse into a mind scarred by neglect and abuse, a woman whose perception of threat and survival had become inseparably intertwined. The courtroom drama was compounded by the public fascination with a female serial killer, a rarity in criminal history. Media coverage was relentless, portraying her as both monster and victim, a figure whose actions provoked both revulsion and a morbid curiosity. Editorials debated morality, gender, and justice, questioning how society's failures may have contributed to the sequence of events that led to her crimes. As testimony unfolded, the gruesome details of the murders were laid bare. Survivors recounted their narrow escapes, while investigators described the precision and brutality of each killing. Aileen's confessions were read aloud, revealing a chilling mix of calm narration and erratic emotion. She detailed the killings as moments of survival, yet her words carried an undercurrent of resignation and inevitability, as if the highways themselves demanded these acts. The trial reached its climax when the jury deliberated the balance between justice and circumstance. The verdict was inevitable, yet shocking in its gravity. Aileen Wuornos was convicted of 6 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to death, receiving 6 consecutive death sentences to be carried out by lethal injection. The weight of her crimes, combined with the calculated nature of her actions, left little room for leniency in the eyes of the law. Public reaction was a mixture of outrage, horror, and reflection. Families of the victims experienced a form of closure, tempered by decades of grief, while society grappled with the broader implications, the intersection of trauma, survival, and murder. Scholars, psychologists, and journalists debated the meaning of her actions, exploring the blurred lines between victimhood and culpability, and the societal failures that allowed her to operate undetected for years. By the end of the trial, Aileen Wuornos' story had cemented itself into the collective consciousness. She was more than a criminal. She became a symbol of desperation, rage, and the devastating consequences of a life shaped by abuse and neglect.
Florida's highways, once silent witnesses to her killings, had become a cautionary tale, roads that concealed terror, revealing the darkness that can lurk beneath ordinary surfaces.
If you enjoyed today's video, we thank you very much. Please like and subscribe to Rare Breed Chronicles. And let's dive into another story that defies the ordinary.
The sun sets over the rolling hills of Labette County, Kansas, painting the horizon in muted oranges and purples. A modest, unassuming inn sits near the crossroads, its windows darkening as evening approaches. To travelers, weary from long journeys along the frontier roads, it promises warmth, shelter, and sustenance, a brief respite from isolation and fatigue. Inside, the Bender family moves quietly, methodical in their routines. Pa Bender, the patriarch, is outwardly courteous, inviting weary guests to eat and stay. His wife, Kate, manages domestic affairs with precision, her composure concealing the sinister reality beneath. Their son and daughter assist in the inn, blending normalcy with subtle menace. The inn itself becomes a stage, every room, staircase, and cellar a tool for control. As travelers settle in for the night, little do they know that they are entering the Benders' carefully constructed trap. The family's methods are both calculated and brutal. Rooms designed for concealment, hidden spaces for isolation, and the pervasive, silent presence of danger. Guests move freely within the inn, unaware that each meal, each conversation, each moment of relaxation is being monitored, evaluated, and recorded in the predator's mind. The first murders occur swiftly, almost imperceptibly. Guests who exhibit vulnerability, tired, isolated, or carrying valuables are subtly directed into rooms or the basement. Pa Bender's charm disarms suspicion, while Kate manipulates perception, maintaining an atmosphere of civility and safety. The act of murder is sudden and efficient. Blows from a hammer, subtle movements to avoid detection, and the concealment of evidence and the meticulous erasure of any trace. Each victim is reduced to an anonymous statistic in the family's ongoing experiment in terror and greed. Outside, the countryside is quiet, indifferent. The wind rustles through the trees, masking sounds of struggle within the inn. Travelers passing by note nothing unusual: smoke from the chimney, the warm glow of lanterns, and the hum of domestic life. Yet within, horror unfolds with chilling efficiency. Victims are bound, silenced, and dispatched, their valuables seized, and their remains hidden, often in the cellar or buried in shallow graves around the property. The Benders' dual existence is striking. To the community, they are ordinary settlers, polite, hard-working, and law-abiding. To the unfortunate few who enter the inn's private spaces, they are predators, executing a carefully honed system of domination, fear, and elimination. Each murder reinforces their control, their sense of power, and their ability to operate undetected. Travelers arrived at the Benders' Inn weary, their bodies stiff from long days on unpaved roads, and their minds seeking nothing more than a warm meal and a safe bed. The inn seemed ordinary, almost comforting, a brief reprieve from the desolate plains. Yet, as they crossed the threshold, subtle cues they could not articulate suggested unease. A shadow in the hallway, the careful glances of the family members, the faint creak of floorboards echoing too deliberately, all hints easily dismissed in the comfort of normalcy, masking an impending nightmare. One young man, carrying a satchel of cash earned from days of trading, recalls the warmth of the hearth as deceptive. The smell of fresh bread and roasted meat was a lure, comforting, but tainted with an unseen tension. He followed Kate Bender to a back room for his lodgings, unaware that this room was the stage for horror. The door clicked closed behind him, and suddenly the veneer of civility dissolved. Sounds he had ignored before, the distant scraping in the basement, the shuffle of boots on creaking floorboards, became ominous, deliberate, and threatening. The Benders' methods were both mechanical and cruelly psychological. Pa Bender wielded a hammer with efficiency, precision honed through repeated acts. Victims felt the first blow almost as a shock, an incomprehensible violence erupting in what had moments before been a safe, familiar space. Kate's role, equally terrifying, was in observation and control, ensuring silence, dictating movement, and manipulating perception to heighten terror. The victims' minds oscillated between disbelief and instinctive fear, caught in a cycle of anticipation, panic, and physical struggle. As the murders continued, the inn became a labyrinth of fear. The cellar was particularly sinister, a dark, windowless space where light struggled to penetrate, and every step echoed in oppressive silence. Bound victims could hear faint noises above, footsteps, whispered commands, the normal sounds of domestic life that mocked their terror. The psychological dimension of the Benders' crimes was as significant as the physical. Victims were stripped of autonomy, forced to navigate spaces designed to disorient, confuse, and subdue. Rumors began to trickle into the surrounding community. Travelers failed to return home. Family members grew concerned. A missing wagon, an unaccounted-for merchant, whispers of foul play. These were the first threads investigators would later follow. Yet the Benders' careful routine, their outward charm, and the isolation of the inn delayed suspicion. Law enforcement, without modern forensic tools or rapid communication, struggled to connect disappearances in a sprawling rural landscape. Each missing person was initially considered a misadventure or voluntary disappearance, and the pattern remained invisible to the casual observer. Victims' final moments, preserved in survivor accounts and posthumous investigation, reveal the intense psychological manipulation at work. Some were lured into the inn with the promise of rest, food, or lodging. Others were entrapped through deception or subtle coercion. The Benders understood the vulnerabilities of travelers, fatigue, trust, and the harshness of frontier life. They exploited these weaknesses with methodical precision, turning ordinary gestures of hospitality into instruments of terror. Outside the inn, the countryside remained indifferent. Wind rustled the prairie grass, and the setting sun cast long shadows over fields and crossroads. Yet beneath this calm, the Benders' domain was a theater of fear and death. The ordinary intersection of frontier roads and domestic life concealed the extraordinary horror within, a calculated microcosm of predation, manipulation, and psychological dominance.
Rumors spread slowly across Labette County, carried by travelers, neighbors, and concerned relatives. A missing merchant here, a vanishing family there. Small inconsistencies that, in isolation, seemed coincidental. But as the number of disappearances mounted, an uneasy pattern emerged. Whispers of foul play began to form a narrative too coherent to ignore. Yet law enforcement faced the immense challenge of investigating crimes in a sprawling rural frontier with limited resources and no modern forensic technology. The first investigators arrived at the Bender Inn under the guise of routine inquiries. The family greeted them with disarming hospitality, their outward demeanor calm, polite, and cooperative. They served meals, smiled, and answered questions with a practiced civility, carefully hiding the inner workings of their murderous operation. Every glance, every gesture was a lesson in concealment. Yet subtle cues, a slight hesitation, a faintly muffled sound from below did not escape the observant eyes of the investigators, who noted the unnerving juxtaposition of warmth and tension. As the investigation deepened, neighbors provided critical insights. Observations of unusual behavior, late-night activity, and the sudden disappearance of travelers accumulated into a body of circumstantial evidence. Law enforcement began to map the disappearances, noting correlations between those who had stayed at the inn and those who were never heard from again. Witnesses described faint groans, odd smells, and occasional glimpses of activity in the cellar or behind the inn. But the rural isolation delayed definitive conclusions. The breakthrough came when physical evidence could no longer be ignored. Searches of the inn uncovered hidden compartments, bloodstains, and concealed spaces in the floor and walls. These discoveries confirmed what many had suspected but could not yet prove. The Benders were methodically murdering and concealing their victims. Each piece of evidence revealed not just individual acts of violence, but a disturbing pattern of premeditation, cruelty, and cunning. The inn itself became a silent witness, its structure reflecting the calculated precision of the family's predatory operations. Investigators soon realized the scale of the crimes. Graves were discovered behind the property, shallow and hastily covered, containing remains that spoke of the violence inflicted within the inn. Items belonging to missing travelers, coins, clothing, personal effects were recovered, cataloged, and linked to the timeline of disappearances. These findings solidified the connection between the Bender family and the string of unsolved vanishings, transforming rumor into undeniable proof. The community responded with a mixture of fear, fascination, and outrage. News spread that the very inn meant to offer refuge had been a trap for unsuspecting travelers. Stories circulated of the victims' final moments, the deceptive calm of the inn, and the meticulous planning of the murders. Law enforcement faced pressure not only to apprehend the perpetrators, but to understand the psychology and methods that enabled such crimes to remain hidden for so long. In this phase, the investigators were both detectives and students of human behavior. They noted the Benders' ability to maintain ordinary appearances while orchestrating extraordinary cruelty. Every pattern, every subtle manipulation, every procedural misstep by the family offered insight into the mind of predators who could seamlessly blend civility with sadism. The combination of observational skill, methodical investigation, and community testimony gradually unraveled the intricate web the Bender family had constructed. By the end of the investigation phase, a chilling picture emerged. A family united not only by blood, but by shared participation in systematic murder. Each member played a distinct role. Pa's physical execution, Kate's control and oversight, the children's assistance, demonstrating coordination, strategic planning, and a disturbing lack of empathy. The scale and method of the Benders' crimes would forever mark them as one of America's most terrifying and calculated family murder units.
Travelers entered the inn exhausted, their bodies carrying the weight of days on rough, unpaved roads. The smell of fresh bread and sizzling meat promised comfort, yet unbeknownst to them, every element of the inn was designed to lull, distract, and deceive. The Benders' victims were ordinary people, merchants, families, wandering pioneers, anyone whose exhaustion or trust could be exploited. One man, carrying silver coins earned through weeks of trading, recalls the quiet of the inn as both welcoming and uncanny. The hearth radiated warmth, but shadows moved oddly, flickering in corners where no light should reach. The creak of floorboards above and below carried a rhythm, almost musical, but one that unnerved him. Every step, every sound became a potential threat. Pa Bender struck with lethal precision. His hammer, often hidden in plain sight, delivered blows so sudden and calculated that victims rarely saw them coming. Each act was efficient, leaving minimal evidence of struggle. Victims described the moment of realization as surreal. An ordinary evening dissolved into chaos, the warm, inviting space transformed into a chamber of fear. Kate Bender's presence added a psychological dimension to the terror. She observed, guided, and manipulated, ensuring that victims were compliant, unaware, or disoriented. Her interactions were subtle, yet terrifying. One moment serving tea, the next pressing a command that would seal a victim's fate. Her understanding of human behavior was evident. She created uncertainty, distrust, and fear without overt violence, amplifying the horror of what was to come. Children of the Bender family assisted in minor but critical ways, locking doors, distracting other travelers, or guiding victims into rooms where the murders would occur. Their roles illustrate the calculated family dynamic. The entire household participated in a system of terror, each member contributing to its efficiency. The cellar was the darkest theater of these crimes. Faint light barely penetrated, and the cold stone walls absorbed sound, leaving victims disoriented and isolated. Bound and trapped, they experienced not only the physical terror of attack, but the psychological torment of anticipation, the unrelenting uncertainty of life or death. The faint creak of footsteps above, the scrape of boots on wooden stairs, and the muffled voices created a symphony of dread, each sound a reminder of human vulnerability and the predatory nature of the family. Some victims experienced fleeting moments of hope, attempts to escape, cries for help, or even brief interactions with outsiders. Yet the Benders' meticulous planning and knowledge of the inn's structure often turned these attempts into failure, reinforcing their dominance and the hopelessness of the victim's situation. Each sequence demonstrates a chilling combination of physical brutality and psychological manipulation, a calculated performance of terror designed to ensure control and eliminate resistance. The aftermath of each murder was equally deliberate. Bodies were hidden in shallow graves around the property, often beneath floorboards or concealed in the cellar. Personal belongings, money, jewelry, clothing were taken and catalogued, reflecting not only greed, but the family's methodical approach to concealment.
Their system ensured that evidence of the murders was nearly invisible to casual observation, delaying suspicion and extending the period of predation. These sequences, repeated over time, reveal the terrifying efficiency of the Bender family. Victims' experiences, when pieced together, illustrate the dual dimensions of horror: the immediate, visceral terror of physical attack, and the prolonged, insidious fear of psychological domination. The inn, once a place of supposed refuge, becomes a labyrinth of terror. Each room, each creaking board, and each shadow, a calculated instrument of control.
Beneath the ordinary exterior of the Bender household lies a disturbingly organized network of cruelty and calculation. Pa Bender, the patriarch, combined charm with violence, presenting the image of a polite, trustworthy innkeeper while orchestrating murders with methodical precision. His outward demeanor disarmed travelers, allowing him to exercise absolute control over unsuspecting victims. His understanding of human behavior, fatigue, trust, and greed was leveraged to manipulate, trap, and ultimately destroy. Kate Bender, equally terrifying, wielded influence not through overt violence, but through subtle coercion and observation. Her ability to project normalcy while orchestrating fear was a critical component of the family's operations. She guided victims, monitored behavior, and ensured compliance. Her psychological acuity amplified the terror, creating a sense that the entire household was complicit, each member a silent participant in the predatory system. The children played their roles with unsettling efficiency. Conditioned by their parents, they became extensions of the family's methodical cruelty. Their actions, locking doors, guiding travelers, maintaining appearances, demonstrate the transmission of predatory behavior within a family unit. Even at young ages, they contributed to a system designed to exploit human vulnerability with chilling effectiveness. The family's motivations were multifaceted. Financial gain was a clear driver, as valuables were routinely taken from victims. Yet there was also a psychological dimension: the thrill of control, the execution of power over life and death, and the satisfaction derived from the calculated concealment of evidence. Murder became a ritualized expression of dominance, a means to assert authority over both victims and the environment. Isolation amplified their control. Situated on a remote crossroads in Labette County, the inn's location minimized external interference, allowing the family to operate with near-total autonomy. Travelers were dependent on the inn for shelter, warmth, and provisions, conditions the Benders exploited with precision. The remoteness not only facilitated their crimes, but psychologically reinforced their sense of invulnerability, creating a feedback loop of audacity and cruelty. The psychological architecture of the family's operation reveals a layered approach to predation. Physical violence, psychological manipulation, environmental control, and familial complicity intersected to produce a system that was both efficient and terrifying. Victims were manipulated, deceived, and ultimately destroyed, while outsiders, investigators, neighbors, and community members remained unaware of the full extent of the crimes. Even their post-crime behavior underscores this calculated pathology. The family maintained normal routines, serving meals, tending to domestic chores, and engaging with the community. Each action reinforced the illusion of ordinary life, masking extraordinary cruelty. This duality, the coexistence of civility and monstrosity, offers insight into the family's psychology, a capacity to compartmentalize, to perform social normalcy while systematically destroying others. Ultimately, the Bender psychology reflects the terrifying efficiency of family-based predation. Each member had a role, each act of murder was deliberate, and every manipulation was executed with precision. The combination of charm, coercion, and violence created a self-reinforcing system that enabled the family to operate undetected for years. Their story is not merely a tale of murder, it is a study in the intersection of family dynamics, psychological manipulation, and methodical predation, a blueprint for terror carried out under the guise of domestic normalcy.
The facade of civility could not last forever. Years of disappearances, combined with mounting community suspicion, eventually forced law enforcement to act. Investigators approached the Bender Inn with caution, aware that behind its ordinary walls lay years of terror meticulously concealed. Every detail, from the placement of furniture to the behavior of family members, became a clue in unraveling the pattern of predation. Searches revealed the horrifying truth. Hidden compartments, bloodstains, and concealed graves confirmed the scale of the Bender's crimes. Items belonging to missing travelers, coins, clothing, and personal effects were meticulously cataloged, linking specific victims to the family. The inn itself, once a symbol of safety, became a silent witness to countless acts of calculated violence. The capture of the family was both dramatic and unsettling. They were arrested quietly, yet the weight of the evidence was immediate and undeniable. Law enforcement, armed with the testimonies of neighbors and surviving travelers, confronted the Benders with the irrefutable proof of their crimes. Each family member faced the consequences of years of deception, violence, and manipulation. Court proceedings exposed the depths of the family's depravity. Testimonies from survivors recounted the chilling combination of psychological control and physical brutality experienced at the inn. Investigators described the meticulous planning, the hidden spaces, and the systemic nature of the murders. The courtroom became a stage where the ordinary domestic life maintained by the Benders clashed violently with the horrors that lurked beneath. The psychological portrait presented in court painted the family as predators acting in concert. Pa Bender's lethal efficiency, Kate's manipulative oversight, and the children's complicity illustrated a coordinated system of cruelty. The evidence, overwhelming and undeniable, highlighted not just individual acts of violence, but a pattern of sustained predation that terrorized a region. Sentencing reflected the severity of the crimes. Though the law of the era imposed limitations, the Benders faced justice for their actions, and the community sought closure for the lives lost. The trial served not only to punish, but to illuminate the extraordinary audacity, calculation, and cruelty of family-based predation. The legacy of the Benders extends beyond the courtroom. Their crimes remain a reference point for studies in criminal psychology, family-based predation, and frontier-era law enforcement. The inn, the crossroads, and the surrounding countryside are imbued with historical memory, a reminder of human capacity for both ordinary civility and extraordinary cruelty. Survivor stories endure as testimony to resilience, courage, and the pursuit of justice, while law enforcement lessons from the case inform approaches to pattern recognition, evidence collection, and community vigilance. The Bloody Benders, though removed from the present, continue to fascinate and horrify. Their story is a study in the intersection of domestic normalcy, psychological manipulation, and systematic violence. It demonstrates how ordinary appearances can conceal extraordinary horror, how isolation can amplify predatory power, and how community vigilance and persistent investigation can ultimately uncover even the most carefully hidden atrocities.
If you enjoyed today's video, we thank you very much. Please like and subscribe to Rare Breed Chronicles. And let's dive into another story that defies the ordinary.